Lord of Industrialization. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 176, Start Multi-Riveting Steaming Steel. The Grand Duke of Mainz's 80th birthday had passed. On the surface, it was a lively celebration, as the host celebrated his birthday. One of his granddaughters was set to marry the Grand Duke of Bavaria's grandson next year. The newly reorganized army had captured as many prey as the Grand Duke of Bavaria and the Duke of Wessenland combined. Behind the scenes, the Upper Region Cooperation Organization reached a preliminary agreement on training a new army. The Duke of Wessenland promised to send troops to assist in the spring defense of the territory of Baron Wessenland and others. The Grand Duke of Mainz sickly warned the Helvetic Confederation envoys not to cause further trouble for the Duke of Wessenland, and the Grand Duke of Bavaria subsequently dropped his troops. The Grand Duke of Bavaria purchased a large quantity of grain and canned goods at a reasonable price. Frederick stayed a few days longer, then said goodbye to Maria and returned to Wesenberg in his hot air balloon. With his territory's external threats resolved and his marriage set, Frederick felt a sense of relief as long as he managed the overall direction of domestic affairs. When people have free time, they like to get things done. He had already decided to bring out the tractors this winter. Shortly after the Harvest Festival on November 11th, Frederick summoned his elite troops to Benz's carriage workshop. Benz, now in his 30s, had been a well-known local carpenter when Frederick's great-grandfather arrived. Later, during Frederick's grandfather's time, they began producing carriages for the Wessenland family. After the advent of bearings, Benz made a fortune modifying and manufacturing carriages. Later, with Frederick's investment, he built a new factory. The two-horse steel-framed heavy-duty carriage he developed the previous year became standard equipment for the Wessenland army, earning him a medal after the Six-Day War. That morning, Frederick surveyed the conference room. Besides Benz, there were a dozen young men who had recently distinguished themselves in the mechanical field, including Schmidt and Liebherr, as well as Beecher's youngest daughter, Katharina. Seeing the principal's new initiative, seemingly a major one, everyone was eager to get started. Only Katharina, appearing in such a new setting, felt a little nervous. She also noticed that she was the only one present without a thermos. She then discovered that Benz's thermos was printed with the words commemoration of the Six-Day Defense. Schmidt's and several others' cups were labeled celebrating the completion of the 100th steam engine, and Liebherr's cup had only a hot air balloon and a date. That day, Beecher had mentioned his youngest daughter's desire to take a teaching position at the University of Wessenberg. Frederick agreed without hesitation, and after inquiring about her research interests, he decisively enlisted her in the tractor research team. At the start of the meeting, Frederick announced, "Today, we're researching a steam-powered machine to replace mules and horses in plowing the fields. The design principle for the new agricultural machinery we're developing can be summarized as multi-rivet steam steel." He held up a finger and continued, "The first requirement for the machine is more. To improve efficiency and achieve leapfrog development, it must be equipped with more plows and automatic seed drills than existing tillage machines, and it must have as many functions as possible." He then held up a second finger and said, "To reduce manufacturing costs and technical requirements, this machine will use rivets for connection, with screws used only in a few areas requiring frequent maintenance." He then held up a third finger, and after seeing that everyone had finished taking notes, he added, "To achieve our first goal, the machine will require a steam engine. We'll start with a 20 horsepower engine and gradually increase horsepower, aiming for 20 to 30 horsepower every 2 to 3 years, ultimately reaching 100 horsepower. Finally, he held up a fourth finger and added, "Such a machine will undoubtedly be expensive and will last for more than a few years. Therefore, to increase its strength and service life, the entire main structure will be constructed of steel." After he finished speaking, he opened his unmarked cup and slowly sipped his hot tea. He then had his secretary, Vanessa, distribute a document. It contained simplified diagrams and schematics of the steam tractor's overall structure and various systems. He had meticulously drawn it with a stylus on beeswax paper, then mimeographed and bound it. It reminded him of elementary school exams from the 1990s. Everyone read it intently, especially Katerina, who quickly found this section in the table of contents about improving the efficiency of magical elemental utilization in steam engine boiler heating. The instructions mentioned a principle for improving the efficiency of magical elemental utilization, but instead of writing it down, they directed them to find a book in the castle library. A note from Frederick granting permission to borrow the book was tucked inside the page. Frederick waited quietly for them to finish reading the document, lest the rest of his speech become empty. He took this opportunity to review the problems encountered so far in steam engine production and development. The biggest problem facing steam engines is the lack of a fundamental theory. Schmidt and his colleagues have recorded extensive data, such as variations in steam pressure and temperature within the cylinder, energy loss in pipes of varying diameters at varying pressures and flow rates, and the relationship between the opening and closing of steam valves and steam pressure and flow rates. However, they are currently unable to derive a theory to guide design from this data. This problem stems primarily from the severely lagging development of mathematical tools, which are unable to provide sufficient support for research. Consequently, the Carnot cycle, crucial for steam engine research, remains undeveloped for a while. According to the Trinity of Science, Technology, and Engineering, current steam engine development can be considered merely a matter of speculation, with the corresponding scientific principles still some way off. To upgrade mathematical tools, he must first address calculus. He began preparing for this last year and plans to focus on writing a history of mathematics next year, incorporating calculus into the curriculum at the end. However, while he had performed well in advanced mathematics in college in his previous life, copying the entire textbook proved challenging, so he could only recall what he could. Furthermore, even if you were to develop a method, it's unclear how many people would be able to learn and master it, and how long it would take, considering the significant number of students failing advanced mathematics each year. After about an hour, everyone had carefully reviewed the document. Frederick asked, "What are your thoughts?" For most present, especially the students of All Might, the idea of using machine power to propel vehicles was a foregone conclusion. Back in Constantinople, All Might had begun researching golem horses, hoping to replace expensive war horses. After all, war horses costing a few hundred gold coins could easily be killed or disabled in battle. A mechanical horse with 4 broken legs could simply be replaced by an aftermarket dealer. However, at the time, the technology was in its infancy, and the mechanical horses were too slow, limited to pulling carts. Because the magic crystals consumed per 100 kilometers, converted into currency, far exceeded the grass consumption of ordinary draft horses, they were unsuccessful. After the advent of the magic reciprocating machine, many people used it to propel vehicles, but the lack of heat dissipation made it difficult to use. Steam engines are currently used for power, known for their high horsepower. Given the recent performance of steam engines, their feasibility for powering vehicles is quite high. However, judging by the document, there are still many issues to be resolved, such as transmission, steering, clutch, and brakes, which will require extensive experimentation before a final solution is achieved. Everyone had a preliminary understanding of the tractor, and problems naturally arose. The next step was to solve these problems. Chapter 177, Studying Components One by One. This was Benz's territory, so everyone let him speak first. "Master," Benz said, "I think we could try making a smaller one first and install it on a carriage. Perhaps it could replace the horses pulling the carriage." Frederick nodded and said, "That's a good idea. If you want it to replace the carriage, it needs to have a higher load capacity and speed than the carriage, and a lower operating cost." Benz shook his head and said, "That's not what I meant. I'm talking about your carriage, sir. If you can use a steam engine to replace horses, how can other nobles compare to you?" Frederick understood. He wasn't talking about steam trucks or something like that, but the luxury cars that served as a symbol of aristocracy. "Put my car aside for now," Frederick shook his head. "Let's work on the tractor for farming first." Benz, thinking he'd flattered the horse, immediately said, "This machine can be directly modified from the chassis of a steel-framed horse-drawn carriage. The modifications primarily focus on the steering system of the front wheels, and the bearings also need strengthening, especially the bearings. During the Six-Day War, over half of the carriages damaged were due to bearing problems. Later, during maintenance, we found many bearings were severely worn." Frederick wrote down the problems he mentioned in his notebook, especially the bearings, highlighting them with a. He had heard about the bearing issue before, and the factors that contributed to the problem ranged from material, design, machining accuracy, to lubricant. The bearing factory was now under the management of one of Amit's students. Frederick looked up and said to him, "Schaeffler, the operating environment of bearings will be much harsher than before, so the design, materials, and processing must be improved. Use alloys where necessary, and magically enhanced metals where necessary. First, meet performance requirements, then control costs." After Schaeffler nodded, Frederick said, "I emphasize again, a machine is composed of many parts. Its performance is the sum of the performance of its individual components. Inadequate performance of a single component will hinder the entire machine." Frederick had repeated similar remarks to them many times, and reiterating them today was meant to reinforce this concern. The tractor he planned to research was based on the 18-horsepower Creation steam tractor produced in Shenyang in his hometown in 1958 for its powertrain, and on common steam tractors in Europe and America in the 19th century for its structure. Even with the Xunsi technology, there were still many issues to address. Katharina took note of this, feeling surprised. She had initially assumed that the meeting would be chaired by Benz or the already prestigious Schmidt, but she hadn't expected it to be chaired by the Duke of Wesson. Ben finally said, "Previously, carriages used shock-absorbing strips made of elastic wooden boards and layers of slime film. Later, steel frame carriages used steel bars and slime glue. As a result, the slime glue was often squeezed out after carrying a load for a long distance. Some people simply stopped using those glues and used only steel bars. In the end, they found that the effect was not much worse. I think that in the future, slime glue will not be used between the axle and the chassis for shock absorption. Steel will be used for everything. The smelter will develop some more elastic steel, like the crossbow arm of a steel crossbow, to reduce shock for the car." Frederick nodded and said, "Alfred is not available today. I will discuss this with the smelter later. I have a suggestion. We can study spring shock absorption. The development of technology is like the shock absorption of a horse-drawn carriage. Initially, the carriage floor and chairs were placed on a flexible mesh of wicker or linen. With the advent of new materials like elastic slime glue, the axles were separated from the carriages by layers of wood and glue. Modifications were then made based on specific needs. If the requirements weren't met, the material or design would be altered, and further revisions would be made until new requirements arose." After confirming Benz's speech, Friedrich signaled Schmidt to speak. Schmidt flipped open his notebook, pulled out a folded blueprint, and handed it to Friedrich, explaining, "We are currently researching a 2-cylinder steam engine. We also plan to recover steam and use it for heating and replenishing water, reducing the amount of water carried by the boiler and mitigating fluctuations caused by water replenishment." Friedrich was a bit surprised when he opened the blueprint. He understood steam recovery, but it was primarily used on ships to conserve precious fresh water. On land, it was used by high-powered steam engines and turbines, which were water-intensive. But he didn't care. As long as it didn't explode, let them research it. If it worked, they could reduce the amount of water in the boiler and reduce its weight, which would be useful for future steamships. If it didn't, they could put it aside for now so they wouldn't have to start from scratch when they developed steamships. The same thing went for the double-cylinder engine. Let them try it. If it worked, it would be a good thing, providing experience for the next locomotive. After reviewing the drawings, Frederick asked, "How do you plan to machine the crankshaft?" Schmidt replied, "I plan to machine it into several parts and then weld them together." Frederick nodded. "In this case, a sleeved crankshaft should be sufficient." He said, "Let's try it first," but he still warned, "This sleeved crankshaft can only be used at low speeds." Schmidt agreed and then asked, "Principal, are the wheels of this tractor driven by these special chains? Would that be too heavy, and it's also very complicated to machine, having to assemble it piece by piece?" Frederick's tractor design used a combination of open chain and gear drive, rather than the belt drive commonly used by steam engines to drive other machinery. He opted for chain drive not only because 19th century steam tractors used the same technology and it was more efficient than belts, but also because he wanted to use this opportunity to market chains and sell bicycles and tricycles. Much like the factory buildings in the industrial park, which use reinforced concrete frames instead of the mature and proven brick structure, technological development can take larger steps when necessary, while simultaneously training the corresponding skilled workforce. Compared to the small-scale deployment of new technologies, The most challenging aspect of their widespread adoption is the training of skilled personnel, the foundation for their widespread adoption. Otherwise, who would have the talent to build cathedrals and large libraries in the future? The same applies to his current chain development. Roller chains have numerous applications, and bicycles lack them in numerous other technologies. If not now, when? After listening to Frederick's explanation of the importance of studying roller chains, Schmidt thought for a while and said, to produce this kind of chain, we need to improve the punching machine and design new machines. Together with heat treatment equipment, it will be enough to build a new factory. Frederick said indifferently, in addition to the chain, there are also matching gear plates. This system will have a huge market in the future. If anyone chooses to specialize in this business, go to the bank to apply for a loan. When you have developed a machine, maybe you can catch up with the completion of the new industrial park. The eyes of many students present lit up, and another way to make a fortune appeared. Frederick didn't care who ultimately took over the chain factory, he just had the chain. He settled on that one item. Then he said, if this tractor were only used for plowing, with reverse and reverse rotation via the shaft, there wouldn't be a clutch needed, controlling the boiler's exhaust would suffice. But customers might also want to use it to drive a mill, saw, or other equipment. Therefore, a clutch is needed at the end of the drive chain to prevent it from running while the flywheel is operating. To this end, I've designed a clutch with 3 gears, forward, idle, and reverse. See if it works. Below his clutch were 2 interlocking drive gears. These gears were relatively wide and arranged in a pattern, with one half interlocking and the other free to drive the other. One drive gear was connected to the steam engine's crankshaft, driving the other, so their rotation directions were opposite. Above, the driven gears formed a pattern. They consisted of 2 gears and a sleeve, mounted on the shaft, allowing them to move left and right. When it moves to the left, the right driven gear meshes with the right drive gear, causing the shaft to rotate forward. When it moves to the right, the left gear meshes with the shaft, causing it to rotate in the opposite direction. By the time it reaches the center, neither driven gear is meshing with the drive gear, and so it stops rotating. Everyone chattered about it, and someone said, this clutch is good. The driven gear and output shaft need a spline connection, but the speed shouldn't be too high when adjusting. It's best to stop the gear. Frederick nodded, and they exchanged preliminary ideas on how to control the movement of the driven gears. Then he looked at Catherine and said with a smile, your task is very heavy, and it is a long-term job. Catherine said nervously, Your Excellency the Duke, I will definitely be able to do it. Frederick chuckled twice and said, don't be nervous. You are also a lecturer at Wessenland University now. Those guys are still students. They have to call you teacher when they see you. You can call me the principal like them. Catherine nodded, and then said, I can understand the principal's requirement to improve the efficiency of magic elements. My father and I have done some research in this area and can help. Frederick shook his head and said, you are not helping me. When calculating the profit of this machine in the future, the technical shares will also be calculated. The proportion of the boiler's heating system is not low, so you are also doing research to make money for yourself. Ah. Catherine was shocked. Are you saying that I can make money from this machine in addition to the salary? Frederick pointed at Schmidt and the others and said, just ask them and you'll know. Even though they're dressed so plainly in front of me now, they all wear a gold chain when they go out. Katerina opened her mouth. As a daughter of an established aristocratic family, she valued understated luxury and inner qualities. For a moment, she didn't know how to complain. Frederick didn't bother to criticize them anyway. He continued, we can't match your understanding of the magical principles in this area, but they're more familiar with the materials. You could talk to them more. Katerina nodded. It was common knowledge that Wesson produced elemental metals. Frederick discussed ideas for improving efficiency with her, then moved on to the steering system. It was a simple system. A turntable drove a chain connected to the ends of the front wheel axles. Turning the steering wheel drove the turntable, which in turn pulled one front wheel backward, steering it to that direction. However, the details required careful study. They had a preliminary briefing today, and would begin in-depth research the next day. Chapter 178 I suggest you read more. Frederick, are you kidding me? Schmidt, we all do it this way. Benz, it's much easier this way. Frederick stood in front of the punch press, bewildered as the worker placed a long steel sheet on a nearby black magic circle to corrupt it, then placed it into the press to press out the roller chain links. This type of corruption magic is typically used against tin cans. Before the dark element dissipates, it can significantly reduce the strength of an object. A skilled user can even break human and animal bones with a single touch. In novels Frederick couldn't read yet, even more skilled users can instantly corrupt the clothing of female knights and sorcerers without harming them. Schmidt explained to the principal, these chains are made of very strong steel. To prevent corruption, we need to increase the power of the punch press, which is currently difficult for us to achieve. Frederick thought so too. This would make metalworking much simpler and significantly improve efficiency. He watched from the side as the young worker fed the steel bar into the punch press, bit by bit. As the punch lowered, the punch parts fell into a basket below and were sent to the next process. When the 1-meter-long bar was finished, Frederick said to the worker and Benz, the punch press is dangerous. That last bit of material wasted when feeding is wasted. Don't risk losing your fingers. I just broke out in a cold sweat. The worker's finger had come within 5 millimeters of the punch during the last feed. Frederick wanted to warn him, but fearing he'd startle him, he reached forward and held his breath for a moment. Benz quickly replied, I'll arrange it right away. Frederick nodded, then said to Schmidt, think carefully about safety. Schmidt naturally agreed. At this time, the worker said, Master, boss, I have a way to cut the materials without using hands. At this time, Benz glared at the worker and said unhappily, work honestly, go home for the new year after you get your salary in a few days, and don't always think about it. After that, he looked at Frederick cautiously, fearing that the master would be angry, but found that he was glared at by the master. Frederick ignored Benz and asked the worker kindly, what's your name? Where are you from? How long have you been working here? After being glared at by the boss, the worker was a little intimidated and answered cautiously, my name is Hoffman. I'm from Franconia. My sister works in the kitchen here, and I came here to live with her this spring. Benz explained in detail, the old birch who often sells wood to us found a woman, his sister, when he passed by Franconia 2 years ago. Old birch is often out and not at home, so he asked the woman to work in the kitchen here. He came here in the spring, and we were short of manpower, so we asked him to do this job. He did a good job, but he was whimsical. Frederick nodded, thinking that this was the common plot in novels where the protagonist pretends to be cool in front of the big boss and slaps the villain in the face while getting the big boss's praise. However, he is the big boss, Hoffman is the protagonist, Benz got the villain's script, and maybe Schmidt, the technician, got the script to assist the protagonist. He smiled and said to Benz, sometime, if you want to buy Bryant a drink, just say I suggested it. Tell him what happened today. If you still don't understand, then don't bother trying to understand. Then he patted Hoffman on the shoulder and said, that's a good idea. Think about it carefully and see if there's anything that needs improvement. With that, he turned and left, ignoring the pale-faced Benz and the somewhat disappointed Hoffman. The first snow of the winter had just fallen this morning, and several people were shoveling snow to the side of the road outside the factory. Schmidt followed behind Frederick and asked curiously, Principal, why don't you listen to the worker's method? Frederick glanced at the still clearing clouds and said calmly, the path we're on is like a long-distance race. Some of those who started with us have fallen behind, and some have dropped out halfway. There are so many things ahead, and they're so difficult. I don't have the time to look back, and I don't have the energy to go back and help anyone. Some people fall behind not because they're slow, but because those ahead have taken up the position. Once that position becomes vacant, someone else will fill it. After saying this, he took a deep breath and silently walked towards the axle workshop. Schmidt followed behind, understanding the situation. It was just Benz's bad luck that he ran into the right opportunity. After finally making it to the afternoon, Benz left the carriage factory in a carriage and entered the city. The walls of Wiesenberg were particularly spectacular that day. Hanging from each battlement was a figure, stretching from the city gate to both sides, giving the impression of endless space. A crowd gathered beneath the city walls, many of them identifying each person, then throwing stones wherever they found the person they were looking for. Not long after, Bryant also left work early and entered the city, following a message from a man sent by Benz. He arrived at a seemingly ordinary restaurant. This restaurant specializes in barbecue, having been open for over 100 years and enjoying a strong reputation among the locals. They had recently been testing a new barbecue sauce given by the owner, said to be made with spices from the south, and the barbecue tasted much better than before. Today, the small restaurant was reserved for takeout only, with Benz serving only dine-in. Regular customers recognized the territory's renowned carpenter, and many joked that he might be meeting his lover. Bryant was immediately greeted by the aroma of roasted whole lamb upon entering, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he asked Benz, "Is this about Janice?" The restaurant owner glanced up from behind the counter. As a veteran of Weissenberg, he naturally recognized the famous members of the Wesson family. Blacksmith Bryant, carpenter Benz, and family merchant Janice were all regulars. Now all the local tenants know that Johnny's, who became the Minister of Commerce of the territory, was recently implicated, and it was related to the gangsters hanging on the city walls, but the master was kind-hearted and did not deal with it publicly. Benz immediately shook his head and said, "It's none of his business. You know he and I don't get along. He stuffed rotten wood into other wood and sent it to me several times. He took advantage of Nina being the head maid at that time and falsely accused me of replacing it. The master asked me to treat you to a drink today. I seem to have messed up something at the factory." Brian breathed a sigh of relief after hearing that. He sat down opposite him, picked up the freshly filled glass, took a big sip of beer and said, "Wesson District swearing, I thought you and Johnny were found out in collusion, so you asked me to plead for you with the master." Wesson District swearing, a few years ago, Master Afu told Johnny not to get too close to those rats in the gutter, but he didn't listen because he was greedy for the money. Now it's good. The master is in charge, and he caught the rat and dealt with him together. I heard that if Nina hadn't gone to the master and cried for a whole day, he would be hanging on the city wall now. The restaurant owner and his wife brought over a roasted whole lamb and other side dishes. Benz cut a large piece of the leg for Bryant, saying, "Let's not talk about his business. He chose his own path. Something happened to me today. The master said something harsh to me. Can you help me figure out what it was?" Bryant frowned and said, "Tell me about it. It's probably nothing serious. The master was just angry and you were unlucky to run into him." Ben sighed and recounted Hoffman's story. Bryant ate and listened. When the other person finished eating, they finished a leg of lamb on their plate. Then he cut the tail and the surrounding meat onto his own plate. "You did something wrong," he said, taking a sip of beer and eating. "You've been busy working on the carriage for too long. You haven't been able to keep up with the master's ideas. What you did today is exactly the opposite of what the master does, and in front of outsiders. It's no exaggeration to say it was a slap in the face to the master." He said it lightly, but Benz was so frightened that he dropped his knife and fork. Craftsmen serving the Wesson family naturally understood aristocratic authority, and even more so, the consequences of offending it. All it took was a glance from the master, and they could blow the wind on the wall, and the court would find a reason. "What should I do?" Benz was on the verge of tears. "Don't worry, have some wine and think about it," Bryant said slowly. "You only know you've angered the master, but do you know why?" Benz quickly forced himself to calm down, recalling the morning's events, but he couldn't figure out where he'd gone wrong. Bryant wasn't in a hurry either. He picked up a piece of golden pumpkin bread, spread it with bright red tomato sauce, and topped it with a few green leaves. It looked delicious and refreshing. After he finished a few slices of bread and half a glass of beer, seeing that Ben still had no idea, he cut himself some roast lamb and ate while saying, "As for today's situation, I have quite a few guys like that guy, what's his name, Hoffman, who just likes to think about this and that. I just let them express their ideas, and if they think it's feasible, they try it out." Benz asked, somewhat puzzled, "You just let them do whatever they want?" Bryant smiled and replied, "In our place, if any new ideas can be put to use, there's a reward of up to 20 florins. Benz took a sip of beer to calm his nerves. Bryant continued, "I remember Schmidt was with you recently. I suggest you talk to him and the students. They understand the master's ideas best. By the way, have you read the master's factory management manual?" Benz shook his head. Bryant had an expression that said, "You should read more books. It's not like before. You can't just sit there and do the work with a few apprentices. You need to use your brain more and command your subordinates like you're commanding an army." Benz nodded thoughtfully. Chapter 179. Young people want to start a business. As winter's ghost festival drew near, the snow fell relentlessly. All farm work in the village, except for the greenhouses, ceased. Factories began paying the final month's wages and bonuses for the year, and the merchants began to get busy. Frederick and his team finished making the clutch parts and took the day off, along with the carriage factory. Testing would resume when work resumed on January 5th. The savings branch of the Wesson Bank was packed with people queuing to deposit their savings. Frederick had taken time to conduct on-site research and happened to witness a fight involving people cutting in line. This led to the widespread adoption of the queue number system throughout the Wesson Canton banking system. The Wesson Bank also introduced a corporate transfer service to chambers of commerce and large merchants. Large transfers no longer required the fear of carrying a large bag of gold coins. Simply remit the funds to the recipient's account, and the bank would issue a receipt with a tax stamp. The recipient could then update the balance in their savings account at the bank. Old Birch was once one of the leading timber merchants in Wesson County. In previous years, he would visit dozens of carpenter shops in town, one by one, to collect payments at the end of each year. This year, things were much easier. He simply had the accountants from the Chamber of Commerce reconcile the payments with the carpenter shops, and then the carpenters would go to the local Wesson Bank savings office to transfer the money to their accounts. That day, Old Birch went to the bank to confirm the Chamber of Commerce's payments, paid the Wesson accounting firm next year's payment, withdrew a small amount to prepare a year-end gift for his family, and returned home just in time for dinner. Upon arriving home, the smell of grilled pepperoni perked him up. Nowadays, with Wesson County's expanded trade with the South, pepper costs 10 kilograms. He only put 1 or 2 grams in a meal, equivalent to a few copper coins, a reasonable price for him. Now, in addition to his wife and 2-year-old daughter, his family also has his brother-in-law Hoffman, who is less than 20 years old. As soon as he sat down, his wife said with a smile, "Everything we eat tonight was bought by Hoffman." Old Birch glanced at the dining table. In addition to pepper sausage, there were also pumpkin bread, red tomato jam, unicorn kidney soup, black crystal eggs with apple cider vinegar and cheesecakes. There was a large bottle of happy water next to it, and then he saw that his daughter was wearing a brand new cotton hat on her head. He frowned and said to Hoffman, "Why are you wasting money like this? Do you still want to save money to marry the big butt girl in your village?" Before Hoffman could answer, his sister said proudly, "Hoffman has made it. That family can marry off the big butt eldest sister, even the big-breasted second sister and the big-breasted third sister together, tisk 40 florins. You can earn about the same amount in a year." He earned it by using his brain. The old birch tree frowned even more tightly. He looked at his wife who was feeling very proud, then at the shy Hoffman, and asked, "Tell me what's going on. I heard that the master has been at your carriage factory recently. Did you do something that the master rewarded you for?" Hoffman said a little embarrassedly. "I recently came up with a small machine that can do the work of 10 people, so the boss gave me a bonus of 20 florins. Later, a university professor helped me register a patent and gave me 20 florins. Now, this little machine is only for him and me. Anyone else who wants to use it has to pay me 20 florins. He then explained to his brother-in-law the automatic feeder he had invented for a punch press. The principle of this small machine is simple. A right-angled rod is attached to the punch head. The vertical rod has right-angled serrations, which are spring-loaded and can be opened slightly outward. A feeder is installed next to the platform below. The feeder has a single-direction pulley. When the punch presses down, the beveled edge of the serrations on the vertical rod does not move the pulley, allowing the short rod to move outward. When the punch rises, the vertical rod is pulled back by a spring, and the right-angled edge drives the teeth on the pulley, causing it to rotate. The pulley, through gears, drives 2 rubber rollers arranged one above the other, causing the steel bar between the rollers to move forward a certain distance. Each time the punch press moves up and down, the steel bar automatically advances a little. The worker only needs to adjust the feed distance and place the steel bars properly, then press the switch all the way down, and the punch press will automatically punch out the steel bars continuously. Old Birch nodded after listening, pretending to understand. He said while eating 2 slices of bread with sausage, "This is a windfall. I may not have it again. This money can be used to settle down the family, buy a house and get married. I still have to work in the future. Also, if I knew you were gambling with this money, I would break your legs." Old Birch was buying your lumber and selling it back all year round. He encountered many monsters and bandits along the way, and he had killed several bandits on his hands. When he finally got serious, Hoffman was scared and broke into cold sweat. Hoffman filled his brother-in-law's cup with happy water and said flatteringly, "This is the drink the master gave me as a reward. Please try it." Old Birch saw that he wanted to ask for something from him. After taking a sip of happy water, he smiled and asked, "Why, what's the matter? Do you want me to introduce you to a girl from the city?" Hoffman blushed and shook his head, and said, "I have an idea I want to ask for your advice. If you agree, I would like to ask for your help. Old Birch squinted at his brother-in-law and said in a deep voice, if it's about me helping you find a house and a girl to live with, we are a family. If it's about money and you want to do business with me, I will treat you as a business partner. You don't want your sister and your niece to beg on the streets in the future, do you? He thought that Hoffman wanted to do business with him because he had some capital, but there were too many accidents in the business world. Not to mention, there were many people who lost their fortunes because of a fire. Some things needed to be made clear first. Hoffman scratched his head and said cautiously, actually, I'm thinking of renting a shop and then buying a punch press and doing it myself. Old Birch gave him a surprised look, then said, I don't know the business you're talking about. I only know that to start a business, one must first determine what they can do. Then see if others have done it, and then consider why customers would buy from them instead of from others. Have you thought about all this? Hoffman immediately replied, I've mentioned this to the Duke and the professors at the university. They think this business has potential and that no one else is doing it. I want to use machines to make hinges for boxes, doors, and windows. These are currently hammered out by hand by blacksmiths, and they can only make a few in a day. If I use a punch press, it'll be much faster, and I could make more in a day than they do in a year. The Duke agreed, and the professors also said they could help me design the molds for the punch press, which would cost 30 florins, including the first set. I've thought about it. I'll use 2 florins of the remaining 10 to rent a shop and buy in some materials at the beginning. At this point, he began to feel embarrassed, his voice lowering slightly. But the punching machine is very expensive, and I don't have that much money. Wesson Bank can lend me money, but I'm from the Duchy of Franconia, so I need a local guarantor. At this point, Old Birch understood his brother-in-law's intention. He wanted him to be a guarantor. He had heard about Wesson Bank's loan policy. Loans for machines didn't come with cash, and if repayments weren't made, the machine would be repossessed, plus depreciation and overdue interest. He also heard something his brother-in-law didn't say. He was a lumber dealer and knew many carpenters. Carpenters needed a lot of hinges to make cabinets, doors, and windows, so he had a market. Besides, there were many merchants in Wessenberg now, and there would be even more in the future. As long as the goods were good and cheap, there would be no problem selling them. Old Birch didn't answer immediately, quietly eating his dinner while pondering the feasibility. Hoffman, on the other hand, was nervously attentive, taking over all the tasks his sister usually did, like pouring drinks and ladling soup. After dinner, Old Birch said to Hoffman, okay, I'll support you this time, and I'll even lend you another sum of money without charging you interest, but let me make this clear, if this deal doesn't work out, don't even think about borrowing money from me again. Unless someone in your family is sick and needs money, I won't give you a penny. Chapter 180 Going Home for the New Year. The snow-covered village seemed serene, a vast expanse of white, devoid of human presence. Occasionally, a few rabbits would paw through the snow in the fields, searching for something to eat. Hoffman trudged through the snow, each step sinking knee-deep into the snow. The white air from his mouth and nose made him look like a steam engine. A fence appeared before him, and he took a deep breath. Finally, he was home. This was a seemingly ordinary village in the southern part of Franconia, less than 10 kilometers from Wesson. Even with such a short distance, Hoffman was wary. He had no martial arts training and relied on a dagger and a slingshot for protection. Near the fence, a rabbit had just emerged from a gap and curiously observed a large, moving object before it. It looked vaguely human, but with a large bulge on its back. Hoffman pulled his slingshot and stone ball from his pocket and unleashed a powerful blow on the rabbit's head. The fields, hills, and animals here belonged to the knights. Those who hunted had to surrender their skins. Hoffman carried the rabbit with its broken hind leg toward the village. The entire village was silent, with only footprints around the well and the firewood piles of each household, and the faint smell of smoke, indicating recent human activity. An old man, wearing a red linen dress with straw and rags peeking out from the sleeves, had just come out to fetch water. Seeing Hoffman, he asked, "Are you back?" Hoffman simply replied, struggling to lift his tired, now unresponsive legs, and quickened his pace toward his home. Knock, knock, knock. There was a hurried knock on the door. It opened, and an elderly woman, wrapped in a large piece of linen to protect herself from the cold, was startled when she saw her son. A smile grew brighter than the sun on her wrinkled face. She excitedly turned back and called out, "Master, our son is back." She pulled her son inside, then quickly walked to the altar of the god of light by the fireplace and knelt, thanking the deity for her son's safe return. After closing the door, an indescribable odor rushed straight into his nose and head, making Hoffman feel a little suffocated. He was used to this smell before, but after living in his brother-in-law's house and the carriage factory dormitory for so long this year, he found that he was no longer accustomed to it after returning home. The room was dim, and the palm-sized flame in the fireplace brought a little light to the room. 2 pigs and a few chickens were sleeping in the dark area near the door. Hoffman walked to the fireplace and put down his backpack, stirring up some dust. Hoffman's father sat in front of the fireplace in a daze, his clothes and trousers stuffed with rags, and his cuffs were tied tightly to his thin wrists with a piece of cloth to prevent the rags from leaking out. He glanced up at his son's blacksmith's clothes and the bucket-sized backpack on the ground, frowning and asking, "Are you squandering your sister's money again?" Hoffman proudly told his father, "I bought all this with my own wages." His father examined him carefully for a moment and said with satisfaction, "You've made some progress." His mother knelt by the fireplace, prayed to the altar of the god of light, and then stood up and said to him, "Go to the master first. The housekeeper came yesterday to ask if you'd returned." Hoffman didn't dare to neglect him. He immediately opened his backpack, grabbed his belongings, and left the house, arriving at a respectable-looking 2-story house on the north side of the village. He had always imagined this place to be the most luxurious in the world. Even the Grand Duke of Franconia's residence had at most one more floor. But he was shocked when he stayed overnight in Nuremberg on his way to Wissenberg. When he arrived at his brother-in-law's house, he found that the master's house was nothing special. As soon as Hoffman entered the gate, he handed the rabbit he had caught on his way back to the Lord Steward and whispered, "This is for you." The steward smiled so hard that his mouth almost reached his ears when he saw the rabbit with a silver coin in its mouth. He nodded and said, "You've made a name for yourself after your trip to the city." Hoffman, leaning forward with a face full of flattery, replied, "Thank you very much, sir, for letting me out." As he spoke, a few silver coins from his pocket somehow slipped into the steward's pocket. He continued, "Sir, my brother-in-law is very short of help these days. Can you take a look?" The steward seemed not to have heard, for he felt a little annoyed. For no other reason than that old Birch had influence with Duke Wesson, possessing far greater wealth and status than himself. And yet, Hoffman's sister, a serf, had been spotted by old Birch, a passing peasant, because of her unusually large butt, and had become his wife. As for why old Birch, a man of considerable status, would fall for a serf, all we can say is, love is a magical thing. The Wesson state had no jurisdiction over the Duchy of Franconia, but old Birch would bring medicinal herbs for the Lord every year when he came to purchase trees. In the Lord's eyes, his status was slightly higher than the steward's. Hoffman, sensing the steward's displeasure, said, "I heard the Duke of Wesson's carriage works are hiring. Apprentices can earn 6 florins a year. If you can read, with 2 years of good work, you can easily earn 10 florins. My brother-in-law knows the carriage works very well. Just give them a call and they'll be able to start working." "Really?" The steward was immediately interested. "You're not kidding, are you?" "Really?" Hoffman nodded confidently. "That's how carriage works were hired. You didn't need an introduction." His words resonated with the steward. He had a son about his own age. If the knight's son wasn't doing well, the title would be lost upon his death. The place would surely be given to a new knight by the Grand Duke of Franconia. Then the knight would have a new steward, and Hoffman would be out of a job. But the steward still had some concerns. He asked, "What if you take too many people away and there's no one to farm?" Hoffman replied, "That's easy. Food is cheap in Wesson County right now. Just buy it." This village was mountainous and landless, and its grain production was only slightly higher than in the old Wesson County. With a 60% rent collection, both landlords and serfs were struggling within their respective classes. Hoffman, like everyone else in the village, was a serf. If he left to live with his brother-in-law, he had to pay a tax of 15 silver coins a year, otherwise he would be considered a runaway slave. The butler thought for a moment, realizing that the money could buy more food than they could grow on the land. He said, "All right, as long as there aren't too many people. Even if they don't come back, the taxes will still be paid." Hoffman immediately thanked the butler and pulled a fresh cucumber from his bosom, offering it to him. "This is something my brother-in-law picked from Duke Wesson's garden. It's a good thing he brought back from Peach Blossom Rock. I have 2 more for you, my master. Don't tell anyone. If Duke Wesson finds out, we'll be whipped. And we'll just turn them over after we finish the whipping." The butler's legs tensed. He'd heard of this before. When Lord Wesson was catching gangsters, they whipped them on the back for theft, robbery, and extortion, while they turned them over for rape. "Wait a minute," he said to Hoffman. "I'll put it away and bring you to my master later." The lord of this place was a knight of the Grand Duke of Franconia. He had suffered several serious injuries in his youth. Now, old, even in his thick cotton coat and the crackling fire in the fireplace, he felt the chill. The lord, as usual, sat in a rocking chair in front of the fireplace, half asleep and half awake, when he met Hoffman. However, the butler repeated everything Hoffman said in his ear, nodding or humming from time to time. Hoffman thought the lord might not be able to eat the cucumbers he had sent. As he was about to leave, his wife called him away and asked about the latest women's clothing trends in Wessenland, how much they cost, and which stores were good. Fortunately, when he went shopping with his brother-in-law and sister before returning, his brother-in-law bought a winter skirt. He spent half an hour vividly describing the city's clothing street and his sister's skirt to his wife. Chapter 181 Going to the city to work. Hoffman left the lord's house and suddenly felt a lighter step. Looking up, the sky, now snowy, seemed to stretch even wider. When he returned home, he saw his parents sitting there, curiously examining his backpack, wanting to see what was inside but afraid to open it. He sat down next to it and began to bring things back. The first thing he pulled out was a bag of fresh cucumbers. "These are fresh cucumbers," he said. "We'll eat them in the next couple of days." His parents carefully picked up a cucumber. It was the first time in their lives that they had seen fresh plants in the snow. Hoffman then brought out packages of sausages, a long-established Wessenland brand, their logo printed on the plastic bags. "This is for the family," Hoffman said. "Pure pork, no offal," his father, surprised, said. "Is it really pure pork?" "Oh, it's good stuff." "It's expensive, isn't it?" "How much is it?" "Did your brother-in-law buy it?" "Why did he buy so much?" "Take some back with you when you go back to work. Don't always eat your brother-in-law's food." These were cheap sausages, 100 grams each, 10 per pack. Hoffman bought 20 kilograms, a huge pile. He smiled and said, "At the factory, the cook cooks for us. Everyone who works gets food, and my sister even secretly gives me some extra." The workers at the carriage factory ate in the cafeteria, where steamed bread and soup were provided free of charge. Any extra steamed bread or vegetables had to be paid for. When he got his food, his sister would pick out a larger steamed bread for him, and he could have an extra bowl of soup if there was any left over. This was common among the cooks whose families worked at the factory, so Hoffman wasn't wrong to say his sister gave him a little extra. He continued, "These sausages are packaged. If you don't open the bag, they'll keep for 2 years. My family can eat half a sausage a day, and we'll have enough until I get home next time." He then explained to his parents how to open the plastic bag containing the sausages. His father was already laughing so hard he didn't know what to say. Eating meat every day was a life only the masters could have. Hoffman then took out a large, 10-kilogram bag of dried pumpkin and said, "These are pumpkins from Wesson. They can be used to make soup. Just boil water." He then took out a set of cheap cutlery made of slime, a self-charging magic lamp, and a large bag of noodles. The silly kid put the noodles in the bag, and they all fell apart. Finally, Hoffman, a little embarrassed, took out 4 sets of tightly packed cotton clothes. "Here are 2 sets I bought for you," he said, scratching his head. "My sister didn't know I bought them, so she bought 2 sets for you too, so it's extra." His parents were now just laughing, but when his father reached for the cotton clothes, his mother stopped him. Hoffman's mother said, "You're not young anymore. It's time to get married. Aren't you attracted to the girl from the family south of the well? Why don't you settle it this time you come back?" "Which of the sisters do you want?" Hoffman blushed and said, "Whoever mother thinks is good." "Okay," his mother said. "I'll go talk to them right away." Then she picked up a bag of sausages and left. Hoffman hurriedly said, "Mother, there's no need to rush, don't worry about it," his mother said. Hoffman, feeling both amused and embarrassed, said, "I have something important to do. My brother-in-law is short of help, and I need to find some friends to help." Before returning, his brother-in-law had lectured him on the importance of not showing off his wealth, and he never mentioned the dozens of gold coins or his factory. His father said, "Then find some honest women." His mother, realizing this wasn't in conflict with finding a daughter-in-law, had her husband take off his clothes and the rags underneath, put them on herself, grabbed a bag of sausages, and left. That evening, Under the glow of the magic lantern, young men from 5 villages feasted on grilled sausages and pumpkin noodles while listening to Hoffman describe the customs and culture of Wessenland. Like Hoffman a year earlier, these men had never strayed more than 5 kilometers from their village in their entire lives, and they were filled with envy and yearning. Seeing the time was right, Hoffman said, "My brother-in-law is hiring. Do you want to go? I've told my master the tax is only 18 silver coins a year. After a year of working there, you might only earn 4 or 5 gold coins at first, but as you get better, you could earn 7 or 8. The young men were stunned, looking at each other in silence for a moment. One young woman, wearing a red dress stuffed with linen and hay, gritted her teeth and said, "If I can eat noodles every day and buy clothes for my family next year, I'll go." Seeing someone else agree, the others followed suit. Hoffman nodded and added, "I'm the one who sent you there, so you'll have to listen to me. I won't make things difficult for you, but I'll focus on preventing you from causing trouble for my brother-in-law. If anyone disobeys, I'll send him back." Sure, the young woman in the red skirt couldn't take her eyes off the new cotton-padded jacket beside her. "As long as I can buy new clothes for our family, unlike now where everyone wears whatever they want." His family's only long coat was this one skirt. In winter, if they didn't want to freeze to death, they had to wear it stuffed with rags and hay. Almost every family in the village was like this, except for the Hoffmans, whose daughter and son-in-law occasionally helped them, so they didn't have to stuff hay. Not to mention noodles and meat. All they had year-round was a variety of porridge, with a little cheese at best. Some people even ate wheat-based food today for the first time. The workers in Wessenland state had bread and meat every day, a deadly temptation for them. Hoffman pointed to a few bags of sausages lying nearby and said, "Take 1 pack each and discuss it with your family. I'll be leaving after New Year's, so you don't need to bring too many gifts. I'll buy you new ones when you get there, and I'll deduct them from your wages." Word of Hoffman's plan to take people to the city to work and earn money spread throughout the village on Winter Spirits Day. Some were eager to try, while others were just listening for the fun. Some started a rumor, saying Hoffman was taking them away to make sausages, and then got beaten while fetching water one day. From that day on, Hoffman's home was flooded with guests every day. Some just wanted to hear his boasts, while others wanted to join him and inquire about his future. Some made up their minds quickly, while others hesitated. Some wanted to leave but their families objected, and some didn't want to leave but were kicked out. The year 1027 arrived, much to everyone's anticipation. When Hoffman left again, he exceeded his recruitment target, with a dozen young people willing to leave the village and pursue a future in the big city. Hoffman's mother also exceeded her target by bringing 3 other girls and her cousin. Chapter 182 Everything is ready. Hoffman's experiences this winter mirror those of the villages and surrounding areas of Wessenland, including his search for a wife. With the start of the new year, border guards were surprised to see a surge in arrivals, mostly young people, many with families. Meanwhile, Frederick was testing a clutch with Schmidt and others. This type of gear clutch had a problem. Shifting could only occur after the gears had stopped rotating, otherwise the gears would rattle and damage the gears. Frederick had no good solution, and the same was true for transmissions. Transmission research also advanced the development of gears. Gears required excellent tooth contact strength and more resistance, and the teeth needed to maintain a high degree of toughness, placing higher demands on machining. Then, Frederick realized he had forgotten about differentials. The bevel gears common in differentials in his previous life were too difficult to machine with current technology. He pondered for a long time, finally recalling a spur gear differential that used ordinary gears and worked well with a chain drive. The differential Frederick designed had a mooncake-shaped housing, driven by a chain or gears. The gears at the top of each axle are located inside the differential. Multiple small gears are mounted on the inner side walls, meshing with the gears on the corresponding axle, like several smaller circles around a large circle. When the outer housing rotates, the small gears drive the gears on that side of the axle. Normally, the internal pinions and the axle gears remain stationary relative to each other. Only when the speed of one axle slows or even stops does the pinion on that side rotate. He built a model using wood and existing gears, but it failed. If the load on either axle is too high, the outer housing will spin. Failure is not a terrible thing. As the elders say, everyone makes mistakes, but engineers must analyze the causes. After 2 days of research, Frederick finally discovered the problem. He had misremembered. The differential was generally correct, the problem lay with the internal pinions. They should be arranged in pairs, forming a C shape when viewed from above and a D shape when viewed from the side, with each end meshing with two axle gears and the center end meshing with each other. When viewed from the side, when the axle gears rotate clockwise, the upper pinions rotate counterclockwise. When the gears rotate counterclockwise, the right side turns upward and the left side turns downward, causing the two side-by-side pinions, rotating in the same direction, to lock against each other. When the load on both sides of the axle is equal, the two pinions act as a single unit, driving the axle gears. Suppose the load on one axle increases, causing the corresponding axle gear to stop rotating. If the clutch is then operating clockwise, the pinion on the stalled side will rotate clockwise around the fixed axle gear, itself also rotating clockwise, simultaneously driving the adjacent pinion counterclockwise, which in turn drives the rotating axle gear on the other side clockwise. While locking and stalling on one axle is rare, merely slowing down the speed, the relative motion can be interpreted as a stall on that axle, thus activating the differential. The new spur gear differential was completed and mounted on a frame along with the carriage axles and wheels. It was then connected to a newly modified two-cylinder steam engine via a newly constructed chain. As the cylinders started, the two wheels immediately began to spin rapidly. A lever mounted on the outside of the wheel triggered a counter with each revolution. 5 minutes later, a student reported to the principal that both wheels were rotating at the same speed. Frederick nodded and told them to proceed with the next test. Soon, a student took a wooden board and pressed it against one wheel to increase the load. The wheel on that side slowed down considerably, while the other wheel not only didn't stop, but actually turned faster. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Another problem had been solved. Next came the more arduous task of assembling the various systems together. If not done right, the lighter parts would be too heavy, while the heavier parts would fall apart. Frederick had Benz build models of the same size for each system. The steam engine, condenser, and water tank were empty wooden boxes, the chain was a hemp rope, and the flywheel was made from a soup bucket lid that had been gnawed by rats in the cafeteria. As long as the dimensions were the same, the group set to work building blocks. Then a problem arose: the steel-framed carriage chassis wasn't suitable for a tractor. Frederick began calculating the weight and position of each system, drawing on his knowledge of truck chassis, and thinking of a chassis that would at least be impervious to crushing. During the final assembly phase, numerous problems arose, and the original assembly plan had to be scrapped and redesigned to facilitate riveting. Through a relentless cycle of problem generation, analysis, solution, and experience-based analysis, the steam tractor gradually took shape. This led to a pile of documents in the archives, heavier than the tractor itself. They meticulously documented the results of every experiment and every detail of the process. Frederick had them compiled into a booklet, ready for use should he ever travel back in time. One day in early March, Frederick deliberately asked Benz, "How many days do you estimate it will take to complete the entire assembly?" Benz flipped open a thick notebook that recorded the tractor's components, ticking off each one as he completed one. 3 days, he replied. In 3 days, all the instruments will be assembled, and then we'll begin water and no-load testing. Frederick nodded and said, "Just watch over the next few days. I'm going to check on the farm implements and send them back when they're finished. Then I'll get back to other things." The farm implements for the steam tractor were being researched and manufactured at Bryant's blacksmith shop, and Frederick had sent a group of experienced farmers to help. Frederick was confident in the master blacksmith, having participated in numerous innovative projects, so he rarely had to worry about this aspect. Bryant had lived up to his trust. The plow, seed drill, trencher, and wheat harvester were all ready. Frederick squatted before several of the brought-out farm tools, examining them with great interest. Although he had advocated for more plows and harrows, the current tractor was only a 20-horsepower steam tractor, capable of driving only one plowshare for deep tillage. Shallow tillage could allow for more plowshares than current plowshares. With current agricultural practices, the typical tillage depth is only about 10 centimeters. After all, 3 to 5 centimeters is sufficient for wheat sowing, and deep plowing is less than 20 centimeters, occurring only once every 4 or 5 years. Without deep tillage, the tillage layer is over 10 centimeters thick, beneath which lies the compacted plow base. This dense, compacted soil hinders water infiltration, air circulation, and the growth of crop roots. The deep plowing Frederick referred to was more than 30 centimeters, which significantly improved soil physical properties, increased effective soil moisture, eliminated weeds, increased nutrients, promoted microbial growth, and improved crop root development. A survey conducted in the 1950s in 14 counties and cities, including Chang'an and Baoji, found that wheat yields in fields plowed 36 to 40 centimeters deep increased by over 40% compared to fields plowed 10 to 20 centimeters deep. Frederick was very satisfied after measuring the size of the plowshare by hand. With technological advancements and widespread adoption of deep plowing, grain production could reach new heights. Another tool for further improving work efficiency was the wheat harvester. It could be towed behind a tractor, powered by wheels on the ground. A rotating sprocket wheel protruding from the side pushed the wheat toward it, while a double-layered sawtooth pattern underneath reciprocated to cut the stalks. A conveyor belt at the rear carried the harvested wheat to the other side of the tractor, where a horse-drawn cart could follow and wait for the wheat and stalks to fall into the cart. Frederick was very satisfied after looking around here. He calculated the date in his mind and thought that he could try the power of the steam tractor during this year's summer harvest and autumn sowing. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183 Draw a Big Scallion Pancake. March. Many citizens of Wessenland rushed to the estate outside the city early in the morning. They had read in the previous day's newspaper that the master had invented a new machine and was currently plowing the fields on the estate, so they came to see the excitement. Metzger, dressed in his gray military uniform, stood out in the crowd, and even more striking was the baby carriage he was pushing. Made of wood, the carriage had railings on all sides, a padded horizontal board inside that served as a stool, a lift-up board on top that served as a tabletop, and sticks protruding from the four corners to form a small sunshade. The wheels were wrapped in a springy slime for shock absorption, and the front wheel could rotate 360 degrees. From time to time, people came up to ask where he had bought a carriage, and Metzger proudly replied that it was a gift from the commander. Just after winter, Richardnell sent word that Katie had a new brother and sister. Katie had decided to return home soon, and since Frederick couldn't leave, she had prepared some gifts, including the baby carriage. Frederick was eager to see what the swordmaster looked like pushing a baby carriage. With new products came new industries, so he had the castle's carpentry workshop make a batch for trial use. The carpenters there weren't usually busy, so if the market took off, he'd let them do it. Metzger and his wife, Rhea, chatted nonstop as they wheeled their not-yet-one-year-old son to the manor. A crowd gathered near a field, discussing the machine in the field. The steam tractor, not counting the cab roof, was about a man's height and 3 meters long. It had the steam engine in front, the cab in the back, the water tank beneath it, and 4 iron wheels. The 2 rear power wheels were 1 meter in diameter, welded from 30-centimeter wide steel plates. They had an H-shaped anti-slip strip welded to the outside, with several spokes in the center. The 2 front guide wheels were half a meter in diameter and 20 centimeters wide, with a raised guide strip welded to the center for easier steering. The front wheels are connected to the water tank via a sturdy, shock-absorbing bogie. When the steering wheel is turned in the cab, it drives a capstan through connecting rods and gears, which in turn rotates the front wheel axle with a chain. These wheels are simple and can only be used on dirt. They will wear out severely if used on stone roads. The steam engine's piston is located in front of the boiler's top, and 2 connecting rods drive the crankshaft. The flywheel is on the left, and the gears and clutch that drive the rear wheels are on the right. A plowshare is attached to the back of the tractor, and it moves almost as fast as an ox or a horse, but the depth of the soil it turns up is so great that knowledgeable people nearby are amazed. Metzger, who knew nothing about farming, only raising and slaughtering pigs, couldn't help but say to his wife, "If we hooked up a cart to the back, we could haul several pigs at a time." Rhea said expectantly, "That's because you need to save more money. If you become a knight, you'll have the money to rent a manor, and then you can raise a lot of pigs." She had been incredibly worried when Metzger said he wanted to join the army 2 years ago. Now that her husband had achieved great success, she felt that becoming a knight's wife seemed within reach. Someone nearby said, "Then Metzger must study hard." Metzger immediately turned and saluted. "Hello, Commander." Frederick returned the salute and reached over to pinch his son's cheek, making the couple burst into laughter. They could brag about it later. The child in the stroller burst into laughter, and Metzger tentatively asked, "Commander, he seems to like you. Would you like to hold him?" Frederick simply smiled, haunted by the memory of a colleague's daughter he'd helped hold and ended up urinating on. He asked Metzger, "We'll be leaving in a few days. Have you settled down at home?" Metzger replied immediately, "Everything's been arranged. Ria and the child have been staying at her parents' house." "There's no problem." Frederick nodded and began to draw fragrant scallion pancake. "Do your best this time in the north. Your name will be registered with the Ministry of Military Affairs. The army will be expanded next year. If you do well, you can become a squad leader when you return. Once the military academy is built, it will be up to you whether you can become an officer and be knighted. When you become a knight, you can lease land for 99 or 499 years to leave a legacy for your children." He spoke without missing a beat. The people watching the tractor nearby looked at Metzger with envy. Metzger's face flushed with excitement at the sight of the scallion pancake. If he were given a butcher knife right now, he would have no problem killing the king. After chatting with him for a while, Frederick went to the edge of the field and easily found the Minister of Agriculture, Matthias. The sun was quite strong today, so Matthias had planted a few vines along the edge of his field, which had grown into sunshade. Frederick glared at him and said, "Planting them here will drain the nutrients from the field." Matthias smiled and replied, "I let the roots grow under the path next to me, so they don't affect the field." Frederick was speechless and gave him a thumbs up. Without waiting for him to ask, Matthias said, "This machine is good. It can plow so deeply. The Elizabeth potatoes planted on this land this year will definitely yield more. There are just not enough plows. It would be nice if there were a few more." Frederick replied, "No hurry. Take your time. This one alone is enough. Many problems need to be solved if it is to be enlarged." Matthias didn't know much about machinery, so he changed the question and said, "It would be better if it could go faster." "No hurry." Frederick said the same thing as before, "Take your time." By the way, he remembered something. "How are the beets this year?" The sugar content of the beetroot strengthened by Matthias last year was close to 10%, which can be used to extract a little white sugar. Currently, all of it is used to make happy water. Matthias replied, "It will definitely be better. This year, many new villages have begun to use the 6-year rotation method, and the yield will be much higher." Frederick nodded. The newly occupied land relied on various high-yield crops to stabilize the people's hearts, so he said, "The seed cultivation work must be strengthened, and the agricultural college must also be strengthened." Matthias said that the current seed strengthening work has encountered some problems. There is not enough farmland, and the land of this manor is indeed limited. Frederick smiled slightly and said, "That's easy. If you like any piece of land around here, just tell me directly." The landlord spoke toughly. The land is his and he can use it however he wants. Matthias had also been a landowner, but his estate in Constantinople was gone. After the 6 days' defense this year, he had received a village as a reward for his contributions. He said, "Let's use the neighboring villages to the east for seed breeding. As a little self-serving gesture, let's include my village." Frederick nodded and instructed Matthias to arrange for the seed-selling Chamber of Commerce to complete the necessary procedures. From then on, the tenant farmers in those villages would become employees of the Chamber of Commerce, ensuring a stable income regardless of drought or flood. He then wanted to check on the tractors when someone arrived to report that a foreigner had come to claim a bounty. All Might had conducted a preliminary assessment and seemed clear. A bounty? Frederick was momentarily stunned. "We don't have any wanted criminals that would cause such a fuss, do we?" The man replied. Professor Almight said it's a sewing machine. Frederick's eyes lit up, and he hurried over. Chapter 184. There is a sewing machine to step on. Frederick hurried back to the castle, washed his face, changed his clothes, and then entered the living room. Besides Ahmed and the family tailor, Roman, there was also a bearded man. Ahmed had already had a shelf brought in to hang the blueprints, which were still drawn on parchment. The bearded man hurriedly bowed and greeted Frederick upon entering. "Greetings, respected Duke of Wesson. Your fame of taking the heads of enemy generals amidst a mighty host has resounded east of the Elbe." Frederick gave a slight nod as a greeting, then sat down on the sofa and asked where he was from and what he did. The bearded man's name was Schneider, a tailor whose home was east of the Elbe, just across the river from Baron Wesson's estate. Last winter, after Baron Wesson and his men had returned, they had begun boasting about Frederick, including the 500 florin bounty he had offered for a sewing machine. Schneider had been thinking about it for most of the winter. As soon as the weather warmed up, he took the blueprints from the bottom of his suitcase and most of his savings, munching on black bread and trying his luck. After he finished introducing himself, Roman said to Frederick, "I just asked around, and Schneider is indeed a good tailor." Frederick saw that since the work had been peer-reviewed, it meant he was at least an experienced tailor and should be reliable. So he looked at Almut, and Almut said, "I've seen his drawings, and I think it's feasible." Frederick nodded and said to Schneider, "Start introducing your machine. If it works, the bounty is yours." Schneider was so nervous that his hands were shaking a little. He pointed at the parchment and began to say, "Sir, my machine is like this. This machine has a wheel on this side. It will turn when you shake it. When it turns, it drives the needle on the other end, and this needle will move up and down. Under the needle is a board with a hole in it. The needle keeps piercing the hole, just like having sex with your wife at night. The hole of this needle is at the top of the head. The thread passes through it. When the needle pierces under the cloth, the thread follows. When the needle pulls up a little but not all the way out, the thread will be pressed by the cloth next to it. Only when the needle moves will the thread form a loop under the cloth, and the board is a shuttle like a weaver's. It is placed on a frame. Another thread passes through its head. When the thread forms a loop, the frame drives the shuttle through, and the thread on the shuttle also passes through. When the needle reaches the end, the thread on the needle tip is pulled tight, and the thread of the shuttle below is caught by the thread of the needle above. Every time the needle is inserted, the cloth moves forward a little, and the cloth is sewn." Frederick nodded, basically understanding. He was no stranger to sewing machines. In his previous life, his mother's dowry included a sewing machine bought by his grandmother. He wanted to replicate it not because he didn't want it, but mainly because he wanted to seize this opportunity to buy a horse bone for a fortune. Although Schneider's sewing machine lacked many accessories and was hand-cranked instead of foot-operated, the most important components looked quite reliable. Frederick didn't know that the sewing machine he had seen in his previous life was a rotary shuttle sewing machine. While Schneider's design was more similar to the previous generation of vibrating shuttle sewing machines. After a few more words with Schneider, he learned that the tailor's wife wove at home and that he had drawn inspiration from the loops left by the thread on the wall when he was repairing shoes, as well as the shuttle on the loom. Frederick looked at Roman, who said, "This method should work." Almut then said, "Such a machine isn't difficult to build. The only thing is that the relative motion of the shuttle and needle must be controlled precisely to ensure the shuttle passes through the coil." Frederick nodded, thought for a moment, and then said, "Let's try building a machine first, focusing on the key components, the shuttle and needle. As long as it works, Schneider gets the reward." Schneider laughed immediately, but was also a little nervous, unsure if such a machine could be built. Frederick said nothing more. He asked Alfu to find Schneider a place to stay in the castle, and then he and Almut went to the castle's carpenter's shop. A slanted table was covered with white paper, and Frederick said, "Let's get started." The group discussed, first drawing the motion relationship between the needle and shuttle, then determining the transmission structure, calculating the required gear ratios, and finally finalizing the dimensions of the various components. 3 days later, a rough model of a sewing machine, primarily made of wood with a few iron parts, was completed. "Try it," Frederick said to Schneider. Schneider carefully stood before the sewing machine, threading the thread. Roman gently pulled it through the needle. He watched as Schneider placed a piece of cloth under the needle and cranked the wheel. The needle quickly pierced the taut linen, and the shuttle, driven by the swinging frame, rustled beneath. As the wheel continued to turn, the needle rose. Roman gently tugged on the thread, and the linen was pulled up slightly without falling out. Schneider breathed a sigh of relief, a smile brighter than the sun. He immediately resumed cranking the wheel, and with his free hand, he slowly pushed the linen forward. A long seam appeared on the fabric. Schneider cut the thread, picked up the linen, and turned it over. He was stunned. On the back, the shuttle had only passed halfway through the thread hole. More than half of the thread had left a small loop. He glanced nervously at Frederick, sweat beading on his forehead. Frederick smiled and said, "Not bad, not bad. There is a success rate of about 40%, which shows that this technology is feasible." Schneider said cautiously, "Sir, this is more than half of the failures." Frederick shook his head and continued with a smile, "When we look at something, we should not only look at the failures, but also the successful parts. Look, the wires are hung, which means it is successful. As long as we solve the problem, there will be more and more successes, don't you think?" Schneider nodded hurriedly. He was worried that his 500 florins were gone, but now it seems that he might still have it. Frederick said seriously, although many details of the sewing machine need to be improved, the technology you provided is the most important. Without this technology, no matter how many details there are, they are useless. You have taken these 500 gold coins. Do you plan to take them in cash or exchange them for an equal amount of goods to ship back home and sell? We have an army going to Baron Wiesen's territory the day after tomorrow. We can take you with us and we won't charge you for shipping, Schneider said immediately, then exchange them for goods. I heard that the glass tableware here is very valuable. I want to buy some to take back. I can get off the boat in Hammer City and then go to Barling City. After buying them there, I can open a tailor shop in the city. Frederick nodded and said, okay, I'll give it to you at cost price. Let me know when the time comes and I'll send you one when the sewing machine is finally finished. Chapter 185 Let's invest. 1027, after several heavy rains, the weather suddenly turned hot. Farm work suddenly eased, allowing the farmers to rest, play a few games of football, enjoy a few drinks, and prepare for the upcoming summer harvest. They needed a break, but the officials and staff of Wesson were busier than me. The day before yesterday, the farmers saw the city tax office asking how much rent they had paid last year. Yesterday, the state tax department came to ask how much they had left after paying the rent. Today, the industry bureau came to inquire about the amount of metal farm implements and machinery in the village, and tomorrow, the commerce bureau would ask how much they would spend on non-food items. Data after data was compiled, calculated, tabulated, and analyzed, and finally placed on Frederick's desk in preparation for the first 5-year plan for Wesson. Frederick was so busy that he had to skip his morning classes, didn't even have time to play with Maria when she came to distribute the profits from his hot air balloon, and even Vanessa, running documents between departments, had lost 3 pounds. By late July, after a series of wrangling and compromises between departments and regions, the Wesson Development Plan 1028-1032 was finally released. Not only was the plan published in full in the Wesson Daily, but it was also printed and sold as a special pamphlet. One day in mid-August, in Hammer, a town near the mouth of the Elbe River in the far north of Wesson, Schupalia, a tall and muscular man in his 30s, invited his friend Buckner to his home. In the garden pavilion of a mansion, Schupalia put a copy of Wesson State Development Plan on the table and asked Buckner, "Have you seen this?" Buckner smiled and said, "When mediocre people regarded it as a fantasy story, smart people were already using magnifying glasses to look for gold coins in it." "How come your guild alliance found gold coins in it?" Schupalia did not answer, but smiled and said, "I saw the gold coins waving at you. The Duke of Wesson plans to develop the wood processing and shipbuilding industries in the Willowbird area in the southeast of Wesson State. I suggest you try it." Buckner shrugged and said, "I can't build a boat by myself, even an inland river boat. A qualified shipbuilder cannot be trained in a few years. Before that, they could only build a bathtub." Schupalia naturally understood this truth, and asked him seriously, "What if your entire shipyard is moved there?" Buckner did not answer, but looked at the other party deeply, waiting for his next words. Schupalia sighed and said, "The Guild Alliance has been in decline since the fall of the Second Puritan Empire. The commercial circle that once surrounded the entire North Sea is gone. The western port was destroyed in the protracted war between the Kingdom of Lisenberg and the Kingdom of Gaul. The lowlands, supported by the Kingdom of Gaul, split the northwest trade with the Kingdom of England and the Green Isle. The ants in the east have reached the coast, and all the cargo stations there have been occupied. Now the Guild Alliance is left with only a few remaining locations in the Rhine Confederation and the Dark Lands to the north. The leader is no longer willing to work and plans to give his position to me, leaving the alliance to eventually perish at my hands." Buckner nodded in agreement. Once, the Guild Alliance was the largest maritime power in the North Sea, even able to veto the succession of small coastal states. It was a great place to enjoy the shade, and his family-run shipyard was lucrative. But now it's gone. The decline of its maritime power has brought with it a decrease in the number of ships. Much of the once prosperous shipyard has been converted into warehouses rented out to foreign merchants. Schupalia continued, "I have a plan. We will develop in another place. Wesson State is the best choice. In the development plan of the Duke of Wesson, the promotion of improved varieties, new agricultural machinery and the construction of water conservancy projects in agriculture are included. We cannot interfere in this aspect, but in other areas, we can do a lot. According to the plan of the Duke of Wesson, in addition to the development of wood processing and shipbuilding in the Willowbur district, it is also planned to develop cement, red brick and pottery manufacturing in the Walnuts district southwest of the Wesson district, and encourage the production of porcelain. The Rachat district in the northwest is the largest area in the Wesson state. There are breeding, leather and food processing, as well as slime glue manufacturing. The Latibur district is in the northeast. There are also many mountains and forests there. Papermaking and printing will be greatly developed. The Zeendorf district west of Nuremberg city is small in area, so the Duke of Wesson plans to concentrate all glass manufacturing industries there. The city of Nuremberg itself is a trade center, and the Duke of Wesson placed the wool textile industry there. In the core Wesson district, there's smelting, machinery manufacturing, and cotton textiles. Developing these industries requires capital. Although business isn't as good as it used to be for many of us, we've saved enough to invest in some businesses there. I also noticed that Duke Wesson has invested heavily in schools, especially those that train craftsmen. Like you said, it takes time to train a craftsman. This explains why so many new industries have emerged in Wesson in such a short period of time, and we're in dire need of craftsmen. I have plenty of craftsmen here. Bachner took a sip from his teacup. He could tell the man across from him had carefully considered his long speech, and it sounded like he was reciting a book. He thought Chopahia had a point, but he couldn't risk his entire fortune so easily. He'd at least have to visit Wesson to investigate. Bachner put down his teacup and asked, "What about you?" Chopahia replied mysteriously, "The former Minister of Commerce of Wesson State was exiled to Cod Island for a crime, and the position is vacant." Bachner, no fool, immediately realized and said calmly, "In other words, you're using us as leverage to secure this position." Chopahia bluntly replied, "If I became Minister of Commerce of Wesson State, would you be at a disadvantage?" Bachner simply smiled. This kind of thing was commonplace for them. The most prominent merchants in Hanma City had close ties with officials. Chopahia sighed again and said, "The East is unstable right now. It might spread here one day." Wesson State is still safe. Bachner nodded in agreement. In late April, a force of over 300 men from Wesson State entered the territory of Wesson Territory and other areas north of Hanma City. A fortnight later, a 500-man coalition of nobles from the east crossed the Elbe River, attempting to plunder the territory of Wiesen and other lands. The battle ended overnight, leaving no one aware of what had happened. The only survivor of the invaders was a frightened man found among the corpses, muttering, "Devil, devil, here comes." Later intelligence reports revealed that only about 100 men participated in the battle, with the remaining Wiesen troops stationed in various towns throughout the night. Meanwhile, smoke erupted in areas undefended by the Wiesen troops. Many villages and towns were plundered by the invaders from the east, even caravans outside the city of Hammer. Rumors circulated that the Wiesen troops appeared human during the day but transformed into demons with eyes as big as beer mugs at night. While the Church of Light dealt with demonic matters, merchants like Chopahia and Bachner were concerned for their own safety. This concern nearly convinced Bachner that even the most valuable money required a life to spend it. Just then, Chopahia's men brought news that startled the two men, before they broke into brilliant smiles. Chapter 186 Please help me. Go kill me. Who'll operate the sewing machine after I kill you? How long should I keep operating it? Until it starts smoking. In the castle's carpenter's shop, carpenters worked on baby carriages, occasionally looking up to see their master bullying a girl. The newly built sewing machine wasn't smoking yet, and it stopped only after it had sewn 2 pieces of cloth completely dry. Belberg pouted, removed the cloth, and began counting the stitches. Unhappily, she said, "I thought you called me back because you'd figured it out, but you didn't expect me to do this kind of work." Frederick smiled and asked, "So you're going back to work on the railroad now?" Belberg pouted again and fell silent. By late August, the sewing machine was working properly, with a skipped stitch rate of less than 1% for over 500 stitches. Then, nothing could be done. Frederick was short of workers, desperately short of them. Not just workers, but capable students at Ahmet had gone on to start their own businesses. Schmidt and Benz, after a quick decision, decided to build a 50-horsepower tractor. Suddenly, no one was ready to build a sewing machine factory. Furthermore, he didn't want to give the sewing machine factory to anyone else. The 4 turns and 1 ring were both money-making tools, and he wanted them all. Sewing machine matters aside, Belleberg had some matters to attend to. Frederick had 2 captive slaves in a special position. Princess Artisha was now instructed by Psyche to teach Frederick the basics of summoning, but whether he could summon them was up to him. Bellabrook had been thrown into the railroad construction from the start, living with the captives' families and doing the same heavy labor during the workday. When they were alone in the study, Frederick pinched her, nodded, and said, "Well, you're much stronger than last year." Bellabrook was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and trousers commonly worn by prisoners of war today. He lifted up his clothes and said nonchalantly, "I'm so thin now." Frederick touched her waistline, nodded, and said, "It shows that you are not lazy at work." Bellabrook asked him, "Do you really want me to do 3 years of hard labor?" Frederick did not answer, but took out a purple silk purse and a silver mailbox from the drawer and put them on the table, pointing and said, "Look for yourself." Bellabrook's face turned pale. There were his family coat of arms on the purse and the mailbox. Frederick said softly, "It's a letter from your mother. I haven't read it. You've disappeared without a trace. Your family thinks I've captured you, so your grandfather wrote to ransom you for 1,000. Why aren't you feeling well?" He suddenly noticed that Bellabrook's face was not looking well. He was completely pale, and his hands were shaking. Bellabrook said with a hint of tears in his voice, "They still haven't let me go." Frederick frowned, confused for a moment. Bellabrook pointed at the mailbox with a trembling finger and said, "Help me see what's in the letter." Frederick's frown deepened. He picked up the mailbox, left the study, and went to Psyche's room. As usual, Psyche, with nothing to do, was lying in her bedroom reading a novel. Seeing Frederick sitting down beside her bed, she asked him, "What are you doing?" Frederick said, "If anything happens when I open the mailbox, please help prevent it." He opened the mailbox, but there was no explosion or poison gas as he had expected. There was only a roll of paper inside, and Psyche examined it and found nothing amiss. Frederick breathed a sigh of relief. He had previously assumed that Bellabrook's family was going to purge her of her honor, which was why he was so frightened. He returned to the study, still reading the letter, and found Bellabrook pacing anxiously. "Nothing," Frederick said, bewildered. "Your mother wants you to go back and marry the Chancellor's grandson." Bellabrook stiffened, trembled, and collapsed to the floor. Frederick hurried over, lying her down on the sofa, and wrung a towel wet with cold water over her face. Bellabrook woke up slowly and saw Frederick standing beside her. She hugged him and burst into tears. Her heart-wrenching cry scared him. Frederick stood there with a puzzled look on his face. He pushed her away when she was tired of crying, then sat beside her and asked, "What's going on?" Bellabrook's body was still shaking. He turned around and hugged Frederick's arm, saying nervously, "You have to save me, you must save me. As long as you don't let me marry that bastard, I will do anything." Frederick said, "Tell me the whole story clearly." Bellabrook swallowed his saliva and said in a voice a little hoarse from crying, "My family has no money. That bastard's family is very rich, so my family wants to marry me to him for money. That bastard, he is not a human being. When he was the same age as you, he slept with his own maid. You should understand what slept means now." Frederick nodded with a frown. Bellabrook's body trembled even more violently, and he continued, "Many people in Cologne know that he was kicked when he was 18, and then he couldn't do it. Who knew that when he couldn't do it, he started doing things that normal people couldn't do? He went to the countryside to capture women and brought them back. He let his dogs and horses have sex with those women, and he watched from the side. He got married 3 years ago. The woman was the daughter of a small lord. Later, it was said that she was killed by a horse." Frederick was very upset. "Is this something that a carbon-based creature can do?" Bellabrook said with tears in his eyes, "Please have mercy and save me. I don't want to become like that. Just write back to my family and tell them that you keep me as a mistress, and let them give up the idea." Frederick said depressedly, "How old am I? Will others believe it if I ask you to be a mistress?" Bellabrook said hurriedly, "You can stockpile it like a squirrel hoarding goods for future use. If you can't do it now, you can still touch it." As for mistresses, Frederick felt that he was not a saint. Maybe he would have one in the future. Bellabrook was also good-looking, but mistresses were all about love. There was no love between him and her. At most, he was looking for an opportunity to satisfy his desire. Besides, she was a prisoner of war and had no psychological burden. Frederick remembered something and asked, "Your family is powerful. Even if you marry into the family, everyone will have their own affairs. Will it cost you your life?" Bellabrook hesitated for a moment before saying, 5 years ago, at the palace ball, he tried to force himself on me, and I kicked him out. I joined the war because I wanted to make a contribution, so that some noble would take a fancy to me, marry me, and let me leave Cologne. Frederick understood. Although he didn't know what kind of predicament her family had fallen into and that the Chancellor's family was using this to threaten her, he was certain that if she married into the family, she would die miserably. If Bellberg had committed some evil act and was then retaliated against, Frederick would have sent her back now. But she was acting in self-preservation, so she was right. Frederick nodded and said, "All right, I'll help you this time, but I'll do it my own way." Chapter 187, Helping in Times of Need. Frederick comforted Bellberg and told her to wait for lunch in the servants' dining room. Afterward, she returned to her sewing machine. He wouldn't eat dinner until smoke started. He wouldn't blindly believe Bellberg's story. He didn't know much about what was happening in Cologne, but he knew someone in Wessenland who was familiar with the situation. Christian had been in Cologne for many years and was familiar with the situation there. Frederick asked Vanessa to inform him to meet him at the castle that afternoon. Niels of the Heger family, Christian, upon hearing who Frederick was asking about, tensed. "Sir, has he captured anyone you know?" Frederick shook his head and said, "No." "So you know what he's done?" Christian sighed and said, "The Heger family patriarch is also a sword master, and the old lady is His Majesty William's first woman. Therefore, their family will be protected in Cologne and the surrounding areas no matter what they do." Frederick understood immediately. He knew the weight these words first love carry in a person's heart. In his previous life, his hometown had become a scenic spot. One year, when he went back, he saw a tourist had hid a pig with his car and was surrounded by villagers who wouldn't let him leave. He went over and saw that the driver was actually his first love and her family. Without saying a word, he helped them out and even bought them tickets home. Christian continued to sigh and said, "That Niels has done so many bad things. One day, the God of Light will punish him. To be honest, he kidnapped the daughter of the manager of my farm. I went to get her back, but he beat me so hard that my teeth were loose. The girl should still be buried in his garden." He kept sighing and recounted Niels's actions in detail, which basically agreed with what Bellberg had said. Frederick asked again, "What about the Shakespearean family of the heraldry? How much do you know about them?" Christian suddenly grew serious and asked, "Is Miss Bellberg Shakespearean here with you?" Frederick didn't answer, only saying, "Tell me about this family." Christian said seriously, "The Shakespearean family is a family that should not be underestimated. Over 100 years ago, they were merely actors in the royal palace. They initially rose to power by currying favor with the then queen. Later, they relied on their exceptional acting skills to mediate among the nobles on behalf of the king and safeguard the interests of the royal family. I've dealt with them quite a bit. They can act in a way that perfectly suits my temperament and hobbies, making me feel like I can be good friends with them, so even if we have arguments, we won't fall out." Frederick smiled and said, "It sounds like they're more suited to being diplomats than you." "Yes," Christian agreed. "That's why they've been in charge of the heraldry for decades, mediating relations between the royal family and the nobility, and between the nobility themselves." Frederick nodded and asked, "So they're all acting? How credible is their story?" Christian answered with certainty, "They don't lie. They only use acting and words to make people sympathize and like them, and then follow their steps step by step." Frederick sighed. "They are really talented?" Christian asked him doubtfully, "Sir, is Miss Shakespeare really here with you? She and Niels have a grudge?" "I was there when she kicked Niels that day," Frederick replied. "This is the first time I've heard of Miss Shakespeare from you. By the way, I heard that the Shakespeare family is short of money recently." Christian thought for a moment and replied, "At the beginning of last year, I heard that they got away to do business with the Averu family in the Madeira kingdom to the west. The believers of the earth god cult would sell hippogriffs to them, so they imported a lot of goods and formed a fleet to sell them. If there is a problem with this batch of goods, it will be a serious blow to them." After hearing this, Frederick recalled the map of the west in his mind, calculated the distance, and said, "It's more than 3,000 kilometers on the sea route, so it's not surprising that something might go wrong." Christian agreed. Frederick asked him again, "Then, do you think it is necessary for us to make friends with the Shakespeare family?" Christian answered with certainty without even thinking, "It is very necessary. The Shakespeare family is the dogs raised by the royal family. They will bite whoever the royal family tells them to bite and wag their tails at whoever the royal family tells them to. They are very well informed, so they also act as intelligence dealers." Frederick thought for a while and said, "You send back the 1,000 florins and the letter from Mrs. Shakespeare that the Shakespeare family sent yesterday, and tell them that no one among the prisoners of war said that she was Miss Shakespeare. Tell them again that if business with the Kingdom of Madeira can still be done, I can give them 50,000 florins of goods on credit. Now that he is rich and powerful, he can buy goods worth tens of thousands of gold coins on credit, but that is just the wholesale price, not that much at the factory price. If the Shakespearean family couldn't repay, he planned to have the church act as guarantor. Such a large sum of money could either be collected from them by the church or they could sell their house. I heard their house is large and well located, not far from the royal palace, surrounded by the rich and powerful. Their garden is one of the top 5 in Cologne. If we buy it and convert it into a greenhouse, we might even make a profit. Then, Frederick solemnly told Christian, "You're going to Cologne to gather information. This spring, many areas west of the Elbe were looted. The king is sending reinforcements to help with the defense. We'll definitely have to respond. I've received word that a force is plotting something, targeting us. The purpose is unclear. Go and find out as much as you can." Christian agreed calmly, though somewhat shocked. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has intelligence-gathering operations, and he handles some intelligence-dealing business, with the associated funds, which the Duke has specifically approved as non-audits. He knew of the king's plans to reinforce the west bank of the Elbe, and had reported it, but he had no information about a certain force targeting Wesson. Even the intelligence agents with connections within the palace hadn't mentioned it. The Duke's direct mention of this matter indicated he had a separate intelligence organization, which was normal. However, the fact that this intelligence organization could access deeper information within the palace was truly remarkable. Frederick pondered for a moment and asked Christian to leave his study for 5 minutes before returning. When Christian returned, Frederick handed him a map of the Rhine Confederation, clearly marking important cities like Cologne and the estates of many prominent nobles. "You have another task," Frederick said. "Purchase real estate in these areas in my name, either mansions within the city or estates outside. I want to establish a chamber of commerce there. Specifically, they must be high-rise buildings. The higher, the better." Christian didn't quite understand this final requirement, but seeing his leader's previous caution, he decided not to ask. Frederick asked him to leave with a map. Seeing that it was still early outside, he decided to go find Heinrich to see how the research on telegraph based on broadcasting was going. Chapter 188. The telegraph is almost ready. Over the past 3 years, construction at the University of Wessenland has continued relentlessly. New buildings have sprung up along the lakefront, and numerous single-family villas have appeared in the hills to the south, housing the professors. The lake in front of the university has begun to be known as University Lake, the original name no longer being used. Heinrich resigned from the Royal Mages last year and joined the University of Wessenland as a professor. Together with his students and colleagues, he established the Lightning Academy, a school dedicated to the teaching and research of electrical magic. Due to a substantial investment from Frederick last year, the Academy has seen a surge in applications this year, all driven by the prospect of future wealth. His example has caused a period of uncertainty within the Royal Mages, especially among new mages who have only been in the order for a few years and are still gaining experience, who are also considering leaving. The Royal Mages are a strategic force within the Confederation of the Rhine, and Frederick, unwilling to overly poach them, has formed a cooperative partnership with the University of Wessenland. This partnership will allow members of the order seeking to earn a living to teach and conduct research at the university, while also allowing students aspiring to join the military to intern at the order. However, Frederick had many complaints about the Royal Magisterium. He had promised them 10,000 florins last year to develop a commercially viable phonograph, but nothing had happened yet. He feared he would have to do it himself. Frederick found Heinrich in a red-tiled laboratory resembling a factory building. He let John wander around before going inside to see what they were working on. Over a year after the radio was launched, Heinrich and his team had made some new discoveries. Several students were assembling an antenna, a ring of iron sheet with a hollow center filled with magic crystal powder. It was over a meter long and about the thickness of a chopstick. This antenna allowed the transmitter to transmit signals farther while allowing the receiver to pick up weaker signals. In April of this year, the Wesson Army, supporting the Wesson territory, relied on a new wireless communication system to command a company to encircle an enemy camp 5 times their size at night, splitting into 3 groups. This gave Frederick a grand plan to develop the telegraph. However, to complete this plan, he needed to improve the equipment, which was Heinrich's current priority. When Frederick arrived, Heinrich had just finished crafting a magic circle. This device could be plugged directly into the signal-generating magic circle like a graphics card, determining the signal's frequency. Principal, Heinrich asked when he looked up and saw him. "What's up?" Frederick replied, "Nothing, just checking in." "You go ahead." Seeing that he was alright, Heinrich went back to his own business and began calling my students to come over for experiments. Frederick didn't understand Morse code, so he made it up on the fly. It wasn't difficult to create a set of Rhenish and Pulse letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. There was a new piece of equipment in the lab today. It was a long box. Black paper tape was threaded through it. The lid had slots for letters. After arranging the text, pressing a letter punched the corresponding hole in the paper tape below. Elsewhere, a student wound the spring of the paper feed mechanism. The spring drove a gear that controlled a pair of rubber rollers that advanced the paper tape. The tape passed through a device whose upper half glowed, while the lower half was a photosensitive magic resistor. The amount of magical elements that passed through it was proportional to the intensity of the light shining on it. The holes in the tape would reflect the light and the light it shone on, resulting in a different signal when connected to the transmitter. Frederick watched quietly as they transmitted the message. The principal is watching. About 5 minutes later, there was movement on the receiver side. The student immediately activated the tape feeder. As soon as the white tape, half the size of a palm, was fed out, the steel needles on the upper and lower edges of the tape began to flicker with sparks, leaving a trail of black marks. The message was quickly translated, a tribute to the principal, at Nuremberg. Frederick nodded with satisfaction, but there was still a problem. The received signals, whether, or comma, were all quite long. "What's going on?" he asked Heinrich. If this problem wasn't properly resolved, the might become a comma, leading to misinterpretation. Heinrich replied, "The speed of paper feeding is different, some are fast and some are slow, and it is difficult to unify them." Frederick thought about it and felt that the escapement of a clock should be able to control the speed of the roller, so he said, "Let me solve this small problem. I may go on the expedition this fall or next spring. Can I make it in time?" Heinrich answered with certainty, "If it is voice-like broadcasting, it will be a bit troublesome, but the current dot and horizontal signals can be transmitted very far, but I still suggest building a transfer station every 200 kilometers to avoid signal distortion." Frederick nodded and said, "I have arranged for someone to buy land. Recently, we have produced more voice communicators for military use. They can be used when we go on the expedition. Maybe we will sell them for a lot of money." Heinrich naturally agreed when he heard that there was money to be made, and then said, "I have an idea. The communicators sold should be equipped with a self-destruct device. If someone wants to dismantle it themselves, it will explode." Frederick's mouth twitched and he nodded in agreement. He went on, "I plan to build a number of telegraph stations in major cities across the Rhine Confederation, and then in important ports on the North Sea and the Inland Sea. These telegraph stations can transmit information to each other, and we can conduct research in this direction next. In terms of speeding up information input and output, perhaps you can refer to Professor Amit's calculator. When he is free later, you can discuss it with him." Heinrich immediately took out his notebook and wrote it down. Frederick gestured for him to leave with him. The two of them went to Heinrich's office nearby. After shutting off the noise, he said, "I also need a small communicator that can communicate over long distances, mainly for spies. I'll need to reserve specific frequencies for them." "No problem," Heinrich agreed. "I'll pre-allocate frequencies for radio, telegraph, and certain communications." Frederick added, "I have an idea. Could radio broadcasts serve as invisible beacons to help ships determine their positions at sea? For example, a ship at sea could receive broadcasts from two locations and determine the direction the broadcasts are coming from, as well as the number of degrees relative to true north. With these two data points, we can calculate our position on a map." Heinrich pondered, picking up a piece of white paper beside him and starting to write and draw. Frederick sat quietly without interrupting him, even making him a pot of tea. "It's theoretically feasible." When Heinrich looked up, the sunset glow had already covered the sky. The broadcast signal can be shielded by materials with high magic resistance. So we can make a shielding tube like a wooden barrel. When its opening faces the direction where the received signal is the strongest, the transmitter is in that direction. Although there will be some errors, I think it will be enough for use at sea. After listening, Frederick thought for a while and nodded and said, "This method sounds feasible. This is a big business. Coastal cities want to buy broadcasting systems, so radios will also be sold. Those captains who are not short of money will definitely buy them. It doesn't matter if it's a little more expensive. After all, it can save lives." The two of them showed bright smiles on their faces, as if they saw countless gold coins waving at them. Chapter 189. Party. It does not change. The sun scorched the earth, making it feel like a furnace. Frederick sensed a slightly more active fire element in the air than usual. His action stirred the magicians, who should have been seeking ways to cool down in the heat of summer. At the end of August, the Wesson Daily ran a front-page advertisement for 10 consecutive days, seeking a patent for a small, highly efficient magic element conversion array, offering a price of 100,000 florins. Frederick's requirements required this array to convert one magic element into another, while minimizing energy consumption. This was the domain of the mage sword masters. Some powerful individuals had occasionally encountered this phenomenon, but because it was so bizarre and difficult to replicate, they attributed it to delusion. The underlying theory for this phenomenon was proposed by Psyche 200 years ago, but it was not accepted by the profession. Perhaps fragments of this theory still exist in some old documents. But Frederick was feeling a bit timid. Despite Psyche's repeated assurances that, without her intervention, progress would take at least 10 years at current levels, there was no guarantee that someone with this script would emerge. He couldn't come up with 100,000 florins right now unless he used other people's bank deposits. Starting this year, the state of Wesson had invested heavily in infrastructure projects, such as the Carolina Canal. Now, every time Frederick visited a construction site, Edward's heart would race for a day. Edward was currently the general contractor for the Carolina Canal project and also the Minister of Construction for the state of Wesson. His role constantly shifted, and so did the way he addressed Frederick. "Boss," he asked the client's father tremblingly, "are you going to change the plan this time?" Frederick stood at the edge of the canal construction site, followed by two beautiful young women, and watched the hard-working people with a sense of emotion. Since the construction company had asked, he replied, "No changes, let's leave it as it is. It should be finished next summer, right?" Edward breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't specify a time frame, but cautiously asked, "How about a written agreement?" His caution was not without reason. This spring, the canal was set to open in just 6 months. At that time, a large influx of laborers, many of them unskilled farmers, arrived in Wesson. So, with a stroke of the pen, the client expanded the canal. The original 20-meter width was suddenly increased to 60 meters, and with the need to dig through a small hill, the work increased 5-fold. Fortunately, the depth remained the same, otherwise Edward would have climbed the castle tower and jumped. Frederick was helpless. In April of that year, much of the west bank of the Elbe was looted, leaving the landowners with no food left. Word spread everywhere about Baron Wesson and his men boasting about Wesson's wealth. Coupled with the fact that the state had a history of hosting refugees, many small landowners simply brought their families and subjects to seek a living. They sailed up the Elbe River, disembarked at a lake in Franconia, and then hiked 2 or 3 days mountain roads to the north of Nuremberg, bordering Franconia. They couldn't stay permanently in Wesson, so they had to endure a year and return the following year with money and newly purchased grain, tools, and seeds for the autumn planting. So Frederick assigned them to dig a canal, with each landowner acting as a small contractor, a kind of work for relief. The contractors were paid handsomely, and Frederick promised them high-yield wheat seeds if they stayed out of trouble. In the end, the money was simply money going from one pocket to another. After the yields increased, they would return to buy more seed. Frederick smiled and said to Edward, "Don't worry. I'm leaving for the campaign in a few days, and I won't change my plans. By the way, how is the bridge over the canal?" The canal couldn't block the road. A bridge over the river was essential. The main reason for widening the canal to 60 meters was that the current maximum span of the stone arch bridge was 30 meters, and the bridge on the main channel had exactly 2 spans. Today, when building a bridge, a cofferdam is first built in the river with wooden piles and mud at the piers. Water wheels are used to drain the water, and then the piers are constructed. Once the 2 piers are completed, a scaffolding is erected in the middle of the river to build the arch. Since there was no water in the canal, the bridge could be built first. Frederick, having never designed a bridge before, decided not to give orders blindly. Edward hired a master bridge builder from the Kingdom of Sardinia to oversee the project, which gave him greater peace of mind. However, the master still felt a sense of shock from the Wesson state. Edward said, "Next autumn, it's no problem. Master Gotti wants to use cement from the industrial zone for the bridge, which is much cheaper than stone. Frederick nodded and said, let him use it. We can build a small trial in another location this year, golden bridges, silver roads, and copper houses. Bridge building is very profitable. Edward remembered the last words in his heart and wondered if he should immediately have his son change his profession and learn from Master Gotti. But work was more important. He added, Master Gotti has designed some bridge designs. I'll let the boss decide. Frederick thought for a moment, then turned to Maria and Susan, who were whispering, and said, come on, let's go see which bridges look good. You can choose, Maria quickly said. No, Mom said I can't interfere with your work. Susan, even younger than Maria, had no idea what Frederick was doing and simply nodded in agreement. Frederick simply smiled and led them back to the village hall in Oak Village. Beneath the massive oak tree in Oak Village, Dawn was playing with the village children. It was acorn season, and she fanned the acorns down with her wings. The children picked them up and fed them to her, and she nuzzled their heads with her chin. Upon seeing Frederick and his friends return, Dawn immediately snatched an acorn from a child's hand, nuzzled their head, and ran over happily. Frederick smiled and reached out to take the acorn, but Dawn didn't even glance at him, giving it to Maria instead. Frederick flicked Dawn's horn in annoyance, and the creature pretended to hide behind Maria. You bastard! Frederick smiled and shook his head, ignoring it. Maria laughed. The three-headed dog, upon hearing its master's voice, leaped out of the village hall and ran in an S-shaped pattern to rub against her feet. Everyone just learned today that this creature is afraid of heights. After Maria carried it and rode Dawn for a round, she felt dizzy and still hasn't fully recovered. After some playful fun, Edward laid out a series of bridge designs for the client to choose from. Master Gotti, trained by a famous Sardinian painter, created designs that could be hung as works of art in a home. Frederick asked Maria and Susan to choose which bridge looked best, and the two girls chatted with each other. At this time, little Franz came over, and Frederick went outside to talk with him. Commander, said little Franz, the army is ready. Frederick nodded. The official order from the city of Cologne has arrived. The Lords of the Rhine Alliance will send troops to garrison west of the Elbe River this autumn for a period of a whole year. Different nobles have different troop allocations. The Duke of Wesseland will send 1,500 troops, while the Duchy of Mainz and the Duchy of Bavaria will each send 1,000 troops. This is a feudal obligation of the nobles and cannot be shirked, so Frederick's fiancée came to accompany him for a few days before he went to war. However, there was a loophole in the military order. The state of Wesseland, the Duchy of Mainz and the Duchy of Bavaria were stationed in the same defense zone, 100 kilometers upstream from the mouth of the Elbe River, under the unified command of the Duke of Wesseland. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190. Just pretend. The Rhine River is a perennial hub of ships, its convenient water transport bringing immense wealth and irrigating vast plains along its banks. It was autumn plowing season, and farmers worked their oxen and horses in the fields. In the distance, houses, some dilapidated and some brand new, could be seen. The sound of a horn from the river made the farmers look up. The water was low, and the ships were hidden by the dike. Only the golden double-headed eagle banner fluttered from the masts. Many troop transports had recently passed the Rhine, and the farmers knew war was imminent. The knight had departed with a dozen men and had also requisitioned an additional ration of oats. On the first ship of the Wesseland fleet, a conscripted militiaman said to Frederick, "Master, there's a village behind the dike. I used to live there." Frederick asked, "Don't you want to go back and take a look?" The militiaman simply smiled wryly and shook his head, seemingly harboring some negative memories of his homeland. Frederick was about to change the subject when a young officer approached him. "Commander, we're almost at our rest stop today." Frederick glanced up at the sun overhead, then turned back and said, "Okay, we'll stop as planned." The young officer before him had a hooked nose and piercing eyes, giving him the air of an eagle. Helmut was a friend of Franz the Younger's from his travels. He came from a declining knightly family in the Duchy of Mecklenburg, a man of great intelligence and years of military experience. After Franz the Younger returned to assume a prominent position in the Wesseland army, he wrote to invite him to join them. However, communication was difficult in those days, and the day after he arrived in Wessenberg fell on the anniversary of the 6 days defense. After an interview, Frederick agreed to appoint Helmut as Deputy Chief of Staff, assisting Franz the Younger in managing the general staff. For this expedition, Frederick left Franz the Younger at home, while Helmut led the staff. 60% of the team were new, so they could be considered as gaining experience through battle. Meanwhile, Frederick's quota for this expedition was 1,500 men. There was no hard and fast limit, he could bring more men, but the Royal Logistics Department only provided supplies based on that number of men. 1,500 men was roughly the size of an infantry regiment, so Frederick led his troops according to the organization of 1 infantry regiment and 3 cavalry companies. This force was drawn from 2 existing regiments, with Helmut currently serving as the commander. The 2 remaining regiments were supplemented by advance recruitment. According to the Ministry of Military Affairs plan, the army needed to be gradually expanded to over 10,000 men, and adjustments to its organization were required. A large-scale reorganization would then take place upon returning next year. The fleet quickly stopped to the right, and in the afternoon, the Duchy of Bavaria's fleet stopped to the left. As night fell, Frederick, the Grand Duke of Bavaria, and the Grand Duke of Mainz, who had been waiting for half a day, had a barbecue on the river bank, with guards standing guard 100 meters away. The Grand Duke of Mainz picked up a skewer of roasted pork belly and handed it to Frederick, saying with a smile, "Commander, you eat first." Frederick didn't take the skewer. Instead, he shook his head and said, "A commander in Teohuashi once said, until the army's wells are drawn, the general does not complain of thirst. Until the army's food is cooked, the general does not complain of hunger. Until the army's arsenal is lit, the general does not complain of cold. Until the army's tents are deployed, the general does not complain of fatigue." That translates to blah blah blah. His psychic Teohuashi language startled the 2 old men, but after translating it into the local dialect, they nodded in agreement. "That's what a former commander said," said the Grand Duke of Bane. "My grandfather said something similar to me, but I didn't fully understand it until I was 40, the Grand Duke of Mainz said to Frederick. "What else did he say? Tell us when you have time." Frederick just smiled and nodded, then picked up a skewer of roasted lamb and began to eat. The Grand Duke of Mainz's calling him commander and handing him the skewer was a sham. The Archduke of Bavaria smiled and said, "You seem quite clear-headed." Frederick ate while asking, "Is it His Majesty William who's behind this?" This expedition was solely for river defense. If each had been responsible for its own defense area, everyone would have been at peace. However, now the 3 factions were being banded together, led by Frederick, who had the lowest rank, age, and seniority, and with 2 highly respected archdukes under his command. Even if they were in alliance, it seemed unnatural. Furthermore, Frederick had 1,500 troops, while the other 2 had 1,000. While the commander might appear to have the most troops, he didn't command an absolute majority. If the other 2 united against him, their numbers would outnumber him. This arrangement clearly seemed to be aimed at sowing discord. The Grand Duke of Mainz was more familiar with the goings-on in the palace. As he brushed oyster sauce on a chicken drumstick, he said, "This was decided by Count Pister, the Minister of War. The king must have approved of it." "Wesson, what are you going to do?" Frederick shrugged, poured beer for the 2 men, and then said, "I have 3 countermeasures. 2 of them are actually the same, and 1 is unacceptable." The Grand Duke of Bane asked with interest, "Oh, what's your trick?" Frederick took a sip of beer and said, "First, you 2 will superficially obey my command. Second, I'll divide the defense zones, and everyone will take care of their own. Third, we'll go put Count Pister in a sack and beat him up. Which one do you 2 choose?" The Grand Duke of Mainz and the Grand Duke of Bane immediately answered in unison, "The third one." Frederick's mouth twitched for a moment before he said, "All right, I'll keep watch for you 2. The 3 of them ate the barbecue in silence for a while. Frederick said, "How about this? We'll divide the defense zones first. Anyway, we just need to defend. Let's build forts in key locations and leave a small number of soldiers on guard. If the enemy approaches, they'll report back to the rear. The main force back there will either strike the incoming enemy head-on or find an ambush. The defense zone is simple. With Hanma City as the center, you 2 will guard the left and right, and I'll go to the southern part of Wesson County. We'll line up along the river and support each other, like a snake. If you strike its head, its tail will follow. If you strike its tail, its head will follow. If you strike its center, both its head and tail will follow." This was the best plan he could come up with. When there were no enemies or few of them, everyone would take care of their own business. When there were more people, they could coordinate strategically. Besides, these two gentlemen were comfortable relying on the defenses of the big city, so it wouldn't be too bad for them to just go to their relative's house. It would cover all the issues. The Grand Duke of Bane seemed unconcerned at this point, agreeing while eating skewers. The Grand Duke of Mines smiled and said, "Don't be so nervous. This operation is actually just a show. The nobles along the Boundary River are small nobles with little say who are used to consume the enemy in the war. The territories of the great nobles are all behind them. It's just that the events in April made those great nobles a little worried, so the king asked us to garrison by the river to reassure them. Anyway, many of the nobles by the river have fled to your side. There is nothing to rob. The other side will not do a business that loses money. Besides, those people on the other side of the Elbe River followed the Osmega Empire to fight the Piast Kingdom." Who would cross the river? Frederick was stunned when he heard this. He thought this was just a show, so he asked, "So, this time the king wants us nobles in the Rhine River Basin to go to the east to put on a show for the nobles west of the Elbe River?" The Grand Duke of Mainz nodded and said, "Yes, the king is paying anyway. Believe it or not, everyone will be living a life of luxury in the city of Hama. I came here today to tell you about this in advance. We can just put on a show when the time comes." Frederick was speechless. Chapter 191 Become the Prince's Teacher. The fleets of the three southern giants, the Duchy of Wesson, the Duchy of Mainz, and the Duchy of Bavaria, sailed down the Rhine in unison, stretching for miles. As they passed Cologne, countless curious onlookers gathered on the shore. Many well-dressed people watched with mixed expressions as the Wesson fleet passed. Last spring, their friends and family had set out from here, full of hopes of achieving great things, boarding ships bound south, only to return with cold, frozen corpses. The army did not disembark in Cologne, partly because the king did not dare, and partly because disembarking and camping for so many people would be difficult. Instead, they continued downstream, intending to transfer to sea vessels in the lowlands. Frederick and his escort disembarked south of Cologne and first went to the royal estate outside the city to meet the king before making an appearance in Cologne. King William arranged for the meeting to take place by a field, where farmers were picking soybeans. Farmers gathered pods one by one, placing them in baskets like fruit, and brought them to the edge of the field to be peeled before the king and Duke Wesson. Frederick sat in a recliner, silent. He had prepared a speech for this meeting, but after seeing the king's left side paralyzed, he felt hesitant to speak. He feared the king might die of anger and then blackmail him, which would be troublesome. While it was possible that the king might be enraged enough to recover, that would be even worse, so he decided not to try. William remained silent, unable to speak, and could only communicate by writing with his right hand. The soybeans in the field were from the same crops Frederick had dyed golden, and after last year's harvest, the planting had been expanded. He had his own reasons for choosing this location for the meeting, to expose Frederick's earlier tricks, but also to show weakness and admit defeat. The establishment of the Upper Rhine Cooperation Organization could shake the very foundations of the Rhine Confederation. For this country, the Rhine River was a vital trade route. Now that the lowlands at the mouth of the river had been lost, if the upper reaches were blocked again, the entire country's commerce would be severely damaged. To break up this alliance, the two old foxes were difficult to deal with, while the overly young Frederick seemed much easier to deal with. William had experience dealing with a young man. If hard tactics didn't work, he'd use soft tactics, elevating him to a level he didn't deserve, letting vanity and power erode his heart. He'd become accustomed to issuing orders from a high position, while sowing the seeds of conflict with his allies, and then just wait and see. The purpose of this military deployment was to create conflict among the three families and sow the seeds. The king was certain he wouldn't live long, so he needed someone to maintain this policy. The paper used by the royal family was specially supplied by the paper mills in Wesson. It was made with insect-repellent medicinal plants, giving it a light yellow color and a hint of fragrance. After purchasing and moistening the paper, rows of fingernail-sized royal coats of arms were pressed out using molds. William picked up the dip pen in the inkwell and wrote in the black, gold-tinged ink reserved for the king, "You are very intelligent, and I envy you. I foresee that you will have the talent to govern a country in the future." Frederick took the note and read it calmly, saying, "Your Majesty, thank you for your compliment." William then wrote, "As your brother, I have a favor to ask of you. I beg you to agree to it." Frederick thought for a moment and replied, as long as it's within my ability, I will agree. He didn't know what the favor was, but he continued with the topic. If it wasn't a good thing, he would just excuse himself by saying, I'm limited. William understood his intention but shrugged it off. He continued, I hope you can become Rudolph's teacher. Frederick frowned slightly and shook his head, declining. Your Highness is intelligent. I haven't even finished my rhetoric course yet. Your Majesty, please seek someone else. He felt alarmed. Was this the king's pretext for keeping him under house arrest in Cologne? William wrote, Rudolph is not a fool, but he lacks the wisdom to be king. Moreover, he is too timid, like a quail. Frederick read it, saying nothing, merely shaking his head. Being a tutor to the crown prince was an honorable position, a position one could consider a key member of the future king's team. But the capital was a quagmire. Everyone knew the king's time was running out, so everyone was vying for the crown prince's attention. Frederick didn't want to waste his time wrestling with pigs. Seeing his refusal, William wrote, as a father dying, I beg you to agree to this. To elevate someone, one must give them a higher and broader platform. Frederick couldn't remain in the south, so he had to be brought to the capital, where there was no shortage of flatterers who could flatter him into an inflated state of self-confidence. But Frederick refused. William assumed that his previous attempt to harm his family had left a thorn in his side, so he had to swallow his pride and lure him into a trap. When people get old, what they care about most are naturally the things they cherish most. I can give everything for the treasure that I value most in my life. I know I did something wrong. I'm sorry to you and your father. I want to kneel down and admit my mistake, but my legs no longer allow me to do so. I hope you can accept my compensation to you and the Wesson family in other ways. I love this country. I love it madly. I don't want a country to be destroyed in my hands, nor do I want it to be destroyed in Rudolph's hands. I implore you to teach Rudolph, at least train him to be a king who can protect the country. After I leave, if Rudolph does not do well, as his uncle, you can scold him, beat him, and punish him in every way you can. Frederick took the 6 notes written by William in succession, pondered for a long time, and finally said with a helpless look, Okay, I'll take this job. But let me make it clear first, I'm still young and I certainly can convince the public. Let's talk about it in a few years. Seeing that he had fallen into a trap, William wrote, I'm very happy that you agreed. Do a good job. This is the honor you deserve. Frederick glanced at the note and asked, I presume the crown prince already has other teachers, since there must be more than one person teaching the crown prince. William didn't hide the fact. He wrote down the names of several important ministers and renowned scholars of the kingdom, including the Duke of Heger, Minister of Finance and Sword Saint, the Count of Pistow, Minister of War, and the Count of Chaspel, Chief of the College of Heraldry. All great nobles Frederick had heard of. At the end of the list, William wrote, They are all loyal and reliable nobles. After reading it, Frederick said, I will visit them. That's right. He seemed to suddenly remember something. What if I have a conflict of interest with a certain teacher while teaching the crown prince? William thought for a moment. To elevate Frederick, he needed some stepping stones, and these ministers and scholars were important enough. All that was needed was a subtle explanation and compensation for the victims up front. So the king wrote, You can replace him. Frederick took the note and immediately shook his head, saying, That's too hurtful. I will solve academic problems academically. Your Majesty, just promise they won't beat me. His facial expression matched that of a child worried about being punished for doing something wrong. William's right mouth curled slightly as he wrote, I'll let them help you. They won't beat you. Don't worry. Frederick breathed a sigh of relief and said to the king, Thank you. William added, There's no need to be polite between us brothers. Frederick saw an elderly lady approaching with a medicine bowl in the distance, and seeing that the king looked a little tired, he said, Your Majesty, are you going to take your medicine? Then I won't disturb your rest. William seemed to be in a good mood, perhaps because Frederick had gotten into a trap, for he actually complained about the medicine. The medicine Rudolph found is terrible. It's torture every time I take it. I feel very sleepy after taking it, and I can't stop wanting to sleep. That feeling makes me feel like I'm dying. Frederick smiled after reading it and said, There's a proverb at Peach Blossom Rock, good medicine, though bitter, is beneficial in curing illness. Honest advice, though unpleasant, helps correct one's shortcomings. William, like a sullen child, wrote, Anyway, the medicine still tastes terrible. I don't want to take it, but I have to. Just then, the noblewoman who had served the king arrived. After introducing themselves, Frederick discovered she was none other than Mrs. Heger, the king's first love. Frederick, no longer a third wheel, bid them farewell and slipped away, pocketing the notes the king had just written. William suddenly felt something was amiss. He struggled to think clearly, but the bitter taste of the medicine interrupted his train of thought. He was about to raise his right hand to pause, but Mrs. Heger, with an angry look, said, "You're not a child anymore. Stop making excuses for not taking your medicine." William had no choice but to take the medicine obediently. However, after taking the medicine and falling asleep, he forgot all about it. Chapter 192 New House. Welcome home, Master. Christian, accompanied by 2 rows of beautiful young maids, lined the gates to greet Frederick. After leaving the royal estate, Frederick headed directly to Cologne, where Christian had purchased a new residence for him. Cologne draws several tributaries from the Rhine, both for fire prevention and sewage disposal. The neighborhood where the mansion stood, separated by the river, was filled with the residences of the powerful. Neighbors were either wealthy or noble, and patrols from the city defense force frequently passed by. The mansion was located at the southernmost corner of the block, on a triangular plot, approximately 60 meters north of the street, 70 meters east and 80 meters west of the river, respectively. To the south stood a 4-story, equilateral triangle building, 30 meters long, with a central triangular patio. Between the building and the street lay a trapezoidal garden, separated by servants' quarters, a stable, a garage, and a wall separating the garden from the street. Frederick glanced at the gate, which had been replaced with his family coat of arms. He got down from behind Dawn and had her caretaker lead her to the stables. The butler behind Christian immediately led the way. Frederick dismissed the maids and saw that the garden was bare. All the original plants had been scraped away, leaving only soil. Christian followed nearby, reporting, "This mansion originally belonged to the Attican family, a family renowned for its numerous naval officers. Now, the remaining surviving member is a young Baron Attican, who is selling his estate to form a fleet. The land, buildings, and furnishings of the mansion are worth approximately 25,000 florins. Baron Attican is willing to sell it to us for 20,000 florins of Wesson unrestricted goods vouchers. I've already signed the contract with him, and we're just waiting for the vouchers to arrive." Frederick paused, thought for a moment, and said, "Give him 40,000 florins in vouchers. The remainder will be my investment. If he needs it, I can sell him a batch of revolvers." He naturally wanted to engage in maritime trade, but finding specialized talent in this field was difficult, so he cast a wide net as an investor to see if he could find a suitable agent. As for weapons, he felt the folding rifle was a bit of a drawback as a primary combat weapon, so he enlarged his revolver into an 8-shot revolver firing round-lead bullets. Christian immediately agreed, saying he would go and negotiate with Baron Addition the next day. He continued, "I found the butler and head maid here. I already knew them. They're a married couple, the disinherited children of a minor noble family in the lowlands. They've worked for a number of merchant families for over a decade and have a good reputation." He added cautiously, "Some of these servants previously served my family and are both competent and reputable. The others were recruited through the guilds. They all come from clean families with no criminal records or bad habits." Frederick simply nodded without saying anything. He and Christian walked around the house. Most of the wooden furniture was still there, but the decorations had all been sold. The kitchenware, tableware, and bedding were all new. Psyche was already in her bedroom, reading. In the courtyard, Christian asked, "My lord, what kind of decorations would you like to purchase?" Frederick frowned. This was a difficult question for him. This was the royal capital, so the decorations had to be not only exquisite and expensive, but also not rustic and meaningless, otherwise it would be a laughingstock. However, there was a way around it. He said, "Teacher Psyche will be here for a while. I'll talk to her and ask for her help. We didn't pay cash for the house, so we'll use the money on the decorations." He was certain he couldn't match Psyche's artistic prowess. Who knew he'd buy an antique that the great artist had once touched? After discussing this, the two men returned to the study, where Christian handed Frederick a stack of invitations. Some were written on traditional parchment scrolls, tied with colorful ribbons and beautiful floral knots. Others were folded white cardboard from Wesson, with intricately hand-painted covers and also tied with ribbons. Frederick scanned them all. Invitations from important ministers of the kingdom to dinners and balls, invitations from noble ladies to tea parties, and even requests for scholars to discuss matters at his leisure. He sorted through the events, putting those he would attend on one side and those he couldn't attend due to time conflicts or the relatively low status of his host on the other. He then asked Christian to respond to each one. Military expeditions were expensive. The logistics standards of the Wesson army were considered outrageous by others. The kingdom's supply was certainly insufficient, so he had to at least make up for the shortfall. So he prepared a number of novel products, intending to advertise them during various events. Finally, Frederick asked Christian to measure the garden floor plan for a glass greenhouse. Then he went to have a private meeting with Psyche. Psyche was still lying quietly on the bed reading a book. Frederick sat beside the bed and asked, "Have you investigated clearly?" Psyche nodded with a cold face and asked him, as the rumors say, "What do you plan to do?" Frederick immediately replied, "Let the church come this time. We will do this first, then that. The church will definitely not sit still and will definitely investigate. Once they investigate, they will definitely find out. Let them decide how to deal with it then." Psyche said speechlessly, "You really know how to kill with a borrowed knife." Frederick sighed deeply and said, "I also want to do it myself, but I don't have enough strength." Psyche didn't say much. Frederick understood the procedure for asking her for help, so he said, "Let's go out and see if there's anything good to eat. I'll treat you." Psyche rolled her eyes at him, annoyed, and said, "You're a duke now. You should act like a noble. How do nobles go shopping or eat out? What kind of people buy things? Have the merchants bring them to you. Whatever you want to eat, have the chefs come and cook it for you. When you become rich and mean, you can still have it delivered to your door." Frederick was furious. He enjoyed shopping, but it was unbecoming of nobles to mix with ordinary people. Afu and the others had said similar things before, but he'd just brushed it off by saying he was inspecting his territory. So Frederick went to his butler, asking him to invite a chef from a good restaurant in Cologne. He was utterly embarrassed. The butler nervously asked, "Excuse me, sir, are you dissatisfied with the cook? What kind of cook do you want? I'll replace him immediately." The kitchen was a crucial part of the mansion, directly managed by the butler. If the new master was dissatisfied with the cook, it wouldn't be hard for him to wonder if the master was displeased with him and was just trying to punish him. Frederick was stunned. He hadn't even drunk water boiled by the cook here, so how could he be dissatisfied? He explained, "It's not dissatisfaction, it's just my first time in Cologne, and I want to try the local specialties." The butler, understanding, said with a puzzled look, "Then let the chef do it. Their skills are much better than those of the street chefs. Otherwise, I wouldn't have hired them." Frederick understood. Learn the civil and military arts, and sell them to the emperor also applied to cooks. Even if it wasn't for the royal palace, being a chef for a nobleman was certainly better than working in a restaurant. "All right," Frederick said, "I'll test the chef's skills tonight." It was dinner time, and only Frederick and Psyche were in the dining room. The table was laden with a rich spread of dishes, some of which Frederick hadn't expected. On the plate before him lay a few slices of soft white bread, smeared with butter, sprinkled with cheese slices and raw onions. It tasted quite good. Of course, there was pork knuckle, the hindquarters of the pig pickled in brine, which was a bit salty, but it went perfectly with a mild beer. Then there were the bread rolls stuffed with ground pork, pepper, and butter, and the pork belly and pea soup, all quite delicious. Chapter 193 Selling Some Arms. Frederick experienced a real aristocratic life in Cologne, which made him miss it a little. He got up after 10 o'clock every morning, had breakfast and dinner, and had some snacks at the tea party or salon in the afternoon. The banquet started in the evening, and the dance started around 9 o'clock, which would not end until the early morning or even the next morning, and then he would go home to sleep. On the evening of the fourth day, Frederick was invited to attend the banquet and dance hosted by Mrs. Delden. Frederick had previously learned from Christian that Mrs. Delden was the sister of the late Queen. The Delden family and her family were both powerful nobles in the Rhine Alliance. She herself was a powerful magic warrior. Another point was that Mrs. Delden's mansion was separated from the mansion of the Minister of Finance, Duke Heger, by a 50-meter wide river, and the two families were opposite each other. In the carriage, Frederick curiously asked Psyche, "What is a magic warrior?" Psyche replied respectfully, "Your Excellency, a magic warrior is someone whose magician and warrior talents are lower in the upper bound and higher in the lower bound, so they learn both, becoming somewhat proficient in everything." She was dressed in a maid's outfit today, Frederick's personal maid, and she was now in a state of pretending to be everything. Frederick asked again, "So, A magic warrior is a jack of all trades, Psyche calmly replied. It depends on one's effort. Frederick nodded, understanding. As the carriage approached Lady Delden's residence, Frederick looked across the river at the palatial mansion, which stretched for about 200 meters along the street. "This is the treatment of a sword master," he exclaimed. "It seems I've treated my master too poorly," Psyche said calmly. "The differences between people are greater than those between humans and slimes." If Richardon really wanted to indulge in pleasure, he would have already been singing his nightingale. The price offered by the Kingdom of Sardinia is a palace and the treatment of a duke, and many noble families have even prepared their daughters. Frederick was at a loss for words. Psyche continued, "If you really want to repay him, get him a whaling ship. He'll be so happy." Frederick nodded and took note. The carriage soon arrived at Mrs. Delden's mansion, and Frederick met her in the living room. Mrs. Delden was in her 30s, but looked 10 years younger than her actual age. She was almost 1.8 meters tall and had a strong build. Frederick took one look at the calluses on her hands and felt that she could easily kill him with a punch. By comparison, her 15-year-old daughter, Josephine, looked much more ladylike. After a round of introductions and pleasantries, Frederick presented his gift. Psyche arrived, holding a beautiful silver box. Mrs. Delden's eyes lit up upon opening the box, and she asked happily, "Is this the revolver you've been selling?" Frederick immediately replied, "Yes, the long one is the same one my master, Richardner, uses." Mrs. Delden smiled and said, "Thank you very much. I love the gift." Mrs. Delden and Frederick chatted for a while about family matters, and finally, reminiscing, "Alice, only we children who lost our parents at a young age know how hard our lives were. My mother died when I was just born, and my father went to war within 2 years and never returned. My sister, who was your age at the time, became ill from taking care of me, and died shortly after giving birth to that useless Rudolph." Frederick was about to say something, but he shut up. Mrs. Delden continued reminiscing, "My father was just a branch of the family. After his death, we were forgotten, remembered only when taxes were collected. Even those tax collectors dared to bully us sisters, always taking too much. That year, the Queen passed away, and neither the adults nor the children could survive. The family set their sights on the Queen position, and after searching everywhere, they found my sister to be the only one suitable, so she was adopted by my uncle." She sneered at this, then noticed they had guests. A warm smile returned to her face, and she said to Frederick, "Why are we talking about these things? Teach me how to use this weapon." They quickly arrived in the garden, set up a long table, and placed a wooden plank on it. They fired from a distance of 10 meters. Mrs. Delden's arms were strong, and after mastering the technique, she quickly achieved a perfect score. "What a good weapon," she carefully observed the revolver in her hand. "It uses a storm to provide power like a blowgun, and uses the magical vitality of metal deformation to seal the gap between the barrel and this magazine. There are very few people within 10 meters who can defend against it, and it can be taken out suddenly. How on earth did you come up with that?" Frederick's common excuse for this kind of question now is, "I thought of it while blowing bubbles," so much so that many years later this statement was included in the elementary school Chinese textbook. Mrs. Delden asked again, "If this is big enough, could it carry a person into space?" Frederick smiled and replied, "I think it could, but it'd be a little difficult to land." Delden thought about it and said, "I think it could replace the trebuchet." Frederick said dejectedly, "I've had that thought, but the jet canister would have to be huge, which would be too expensive." He was indeed frustrated. The development of the jet cannon had failed. Limited by the effects of the magic storm, its muzzle velocity was too low. It was fine for mortars and guns, but a jet cannon with a range of several kilometers was useless. Professor Diesel had now focused his research on engines, and Professor Julius, under the principal's direction, was researching nitrocellulose. However, this didn't stop him from making money with air rifles. After all, jet canisters were sufficient for small arms and had some advantages. Mrs. Delden saw his genuine frustration and concluded that it was indeed a failure. She thought for a moment and asked, "How much would a weapon like this cost if it were just for the guards? Would 60 florins be enough?" She thought the weapon's craftsmanship was intricate. The spiral grooves in the barrel alone required meticulous grinding, and the price must have been high. But the weapon was worth the price. Close combat on the battlefield was dangerous. Even a tin can could fall and be killed. A weapon that could kill anyone at close range was a lifesaver. Frederick smiled and replied, "If you buy 10 or more, Each will be 30 florins. Everyone else is the same price. Mrs. Deldon was a little surprised, expecting a bargain down to 50 florins, but she was surprised to see the price halved. She would have been shocked to learn that a plain, export-grade revolver cost only 5 florins. "I want to buy 30 of them," said Mrs. Deldon. "When can the delivery be made?" Frederick pretended to be very hesitant, and then said, "I've taken all my stock with me on this expedition. I'll send someone back and try to deliver it before the Rhine freezes. Other companies have also placed orders for a lot of them a few days ago. Count Deldon also participated in this expedition and set off half a month ago." Mrs. Deldon bought the revolvers this time for her husband. She thought for a moment, then smiled and asked Frederick, "I'll help you sell to other families. Can you give me priority? The Minister of War and the Minister of Finance and their families will be attending tonight's ball. I can make introductions for you and also help you convince them to equip the guards." Frederick feigned surprise and said, "If you help me sell the pistols, madam, I'll take a smaller commission of 2 florins per pistol. If you don't mind, madam, I can have my guards give you their own." Madame Deldon immediately agreed, and Frederick instructed Psyche to notify the guards, asking those on duty to bring out their service pistols. The Wesson army had a different set of revolvers for personal use than for sale, and Frederick had already prepared 200 of them as samples. They were just laying on the ground, cleaned them, and brought them over. Chapter 194 Big Business. Frederick had witnessed the power of Madame Deldon. As soon as the 30 second-hand revolvers arrived, she sent for Count Pister, Minister of War, and Duke of Heger, Minister of Finance, to dinner. The 2 neighbors soon arrived. Count Pister, however, had dark circles under his eyes. Madame Deldon smiled and asked, "What's that new eyeshadow?" Count Pister merely replied perfunctorily, then glared at Frederick. He had attended a ball at the home of Earl Shaspel, Chief Minister of Heraldry, the previous night. While using the restroom, he was assaulted with a sack over his head. The assailant had made no secret of his identity. The voice of the person who had spread the news was clearly Duke Wesson. Seeing this, Lady Deldon immediately embraced Frederick, who was sitting next to her, and said angrily, "What? You want to bully Frederick? Are you used to bullying orphans? You used to bully me and my sister, and you used to ride your horse and destroy our wheat fields. Now you want to bully him? I tell you, whoever bullies Frederick is bullying me." Frederick was touched. Such words should not be said casually. Now that Lady Deldon had said it in public, if he couldn't keep it in the future, he would become a laughingstock. Count Pisto immediately backed down. Things were different now. Who could have imagined that his eldest cousin, who only knew how to cry, would become queen, and that his youngest cousin, who threw lumps of mud at him, would marry one of the vice-masters of the Royal Knights? Now he didn't need to ask this cousin for anything he wanted to accomplish, but she could still sabotage anything he wanted. At this time, Duke Heger arrived. Frederick was startled when he saw him, having not noticed his appearance before. However, Frederick still noticed that after he appeared, the first thing he did was look at Psyche, who was standing in the corner of the living room with Mrs. Deldon's maid. They seemed to have some eye contact, but he immediately pretended nothing happened. Duke Heger was not tall, only half a head taller than Frederick, and as thin as a monkey. No one dared to look down on a swordmaster because of this. He glanced at Frederick, waved and said, "Come here, let me see." Mrs. Deldon let go of Frederick and let him go. Frederick went over and exchanged a few polite words with him, and then he stretched out his hand and pinched several places on his body. "Not bad, not bad." Duke Heger looked very satisfied. "You are in good physical condition and have not been lazy in training." Richardon really caught a good fish. Frederick was very upset. It seemed that everyone in the circle knew that his master loved fishing. Duke Heger continued, "I was originally thinking of snatching up an apprentice, but you're more suited to his style than mine, so I won't bother you." Frederick immediately said, "I'd be honored to receive your guidance." Duke Heger said seriously, "Eat well, rest well, sleep well, and don't get involved with women after the age of 16. That's all you need to be careful about." Frederick's mouth twitched as he politely thanked him. Dinner was served, and everyone ate and talked at the table. Today's main course was a whole roast pig. The skin on the pig at the table was unlike the other roast pigs, which had a shiny, bubbly, and crispy skin. At the beginning of the meal, Lady Deldon's daughter, Josephine, struck up a conversation with Frederick. She was curious about the recent prints that had appeared in the Wesson state. After she finished her topic, Lady Deldon got down to business. first asking the two ministers if the knights could be equipped with revolvers like the one Duke Wesson had. The Royal Knights Order differed from the Mage Order in that its leader was the king, and whoever held the king was the leader. 5 deputy leaders each led a separate knight contingent, each independent of the other, but acting in mutual restraint. Count Delden was one of the deputy leaders, so it was perfectly acceptable for Mrs. Delden to ask on her husband's behalf. Duke Heger took a sip of beer and said, "This weapon is quite useful. It can save lives at the right time. I suggest each knight carry 2 or 3. A faint smile crossed Frederick's face. He always ate barbecue with much greater abandon. The words of a swordsman at the pinnacle of martial prowess were more effective than any advertisement. Count Pisto had seen Frederick trying to sell weapons at the ball yesterday, and he said, "It's just that this kind of weapon is too expensive. Ordinary enchanted weapons are not that expensive, and I can't explain it to His Majesty, but there is a way. If Duke Wesson is willing to sell other weapons, I only need to report a total amount to His Majesty, and I think His Majesty will agree." Frederick washed down the barbecue in his mouth with a sip of beer, and said helplessly, "The muskets equipped in my army look powerful, but a lot of them broke after a battle. Some of the bullets fell out by themselves when they were loaded. If Ansbach and the others had not wanted to harm me, I would not have equipped myself with such immature weapons. So what I sell now are folding rifles that can be loaded with bullets and revolvers that are a little bigger. The bullets have also been replaced with lead mushroom heads, which are lighter and can shoot farther. I will replace those guns and bullets with new ones when they are used up. After all, money cannot be wasted. The sale of folding rifles by the state of Wesson and the purchase of revolvers by the Duchy of Mainz and the Duchy of Bavaria were all public information, and were introduced in the Wesson Daily, so the other 3 people felt that Frederick was telling the truth. Count Pister asked him, "How much are the revolvers?" Frederick replied, "The barrels for these rifles are very complicated to make, so each one costs 100 florins, and 90 more, so expensive." Count Pister was surprised. According to Frederick's calculations, even after deducting profits, his army of several thousand would have cost 200,000 to 300,000 florins. Count Pister asked with some distrust, "Then where did you get the money for all that weaponry?" "Borrowed it," Frederick shrugged. "I borrowed it from that pagan merchant, using the customs duties and elemental metal trade in my territory as collateral." Count Pister thought there was some truth to this and looked at Duke Heger. Duke Heger was the Minister of Finance, but the king had given him the position to win him over and make money. The actual work was done by subordinates, but he still had a good idea of how much money was in the treasury. "The treasury is running low," Duke Heger said. "We can buy more short ones, but the longer ones will only be used to equip the royal guards." Count Pisto nodded and began bargaining with Frederick. By the end of dinner, they had reached an agreement. Frederick would provide weapons to the royal guards and the royal magisterium of the Confederation of the Rhine for 50 florins each and revolvers for 120 florins each. He also negotiated a deal to sell Wesson specialties to the Pisto and Heger families at a low price. Chapter 195 Weeping Angel. To the sound of cheerful music, Miss Delden and Duke Wesson entered the dance floor together, twirling in circles in the center. The guests followed suit, each with their partner, and twirled around the lead dancer in the center. Frederick still wasn't used to the dance, and after the song, he felt a little dizzy. Josephine helped him away, and the two of them went into a small room off the ballroom. Frederick had learned over the past few days to smile and not explain what had happened inside. No matter how he tried, no one listened, instead accusing him of denying his guilt. Meanwhile, a seemingly elegant gentleman approached a corner of the ballroom where the servants gathered and said affectionately to Duke Wesson's maid, "Beautiful lady, you are the most dazzling star I have ever seen. May I have the honor of seeing you?" Duke Heger had been dancing with his partner on the dance floor, but in the blink of an eye, his partner realized that no one was standing in front of them, and they were holding on to empty air. Sorry, Duke Heger pressed his grandson's head and apologized to Psyche like a grandson. "He's still young and doesn't understand. Please don't be angry." Psyche simply glanced at them calmly, then said expressionlessly, "Be more careful next time." Duke Heger, relieved, immediately dragged Nils Heger away. After taking 2 steps, Nils asked his grandfather with a hint of frustration, "Grandpa, why are you so afraid of that Wesson? He's just relying on his master being a sword master like you." Duke Heger slapped his grandson and said in a low, serious voice, "That master just now is Duke Wesson's strongest support. Richardel and I may not be able to defeat her together. Remember, I can help you deal with the others, but don't mess with Duke Wessen's people." Nils didn't take it seriously, thinking that his grandfather was trying to scare him again because of his recent feud with the Shasbill's family, but he still agreed honestly. He wandered around the ballroom, feeling bored. Frederick and Josephine returned, and he approached to stop Frederick. "Hello, Duke Wesson," Nils said formally, greeting and introducing himself. Frederick responded with a calm, polite smile. Then, Nils flashed a lewd smile and asked, "How's Bellberg?" Frederick blinked. Was that a question to be asked in public? Nils continued, his tone lewd. "Oh, stop pretending. Otherwise, why would you give her family so much money? You've got good taste. Bellberg's figure is obvious even in her skirt. Hey, all pretty faces are the same." Frederick glanced around. No one was within 2 meters. He glanced at Psyche and winked. Nils continued, "Let me tell you, if you like beautiful women, I can introduce you to them. I know who's beautiful in Cologne." At that moment, a pure white light emanated from Frederick's body, like a giant light bulb. Though bright, it wasn't glaring at all, feeling rather gentle, like a kind person caressing your face. The light rapidly spread from the ballroom in all directions, oblivious to any obstruction, walls, and other obstacles. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped the entire city of Cologne. Everyone in the city was stunned. The priests of the Church of Light, versed in scripture, reacted instantly and were ecstatic. Some danced with joy, while others knelt in prayer, their devotion unprecedented. Suddenly, at a certain moment, an overwhelming pressure emerged from the white light. As if surrounded by a supreme being. Everyone felt as insignificant as an ant. At the same time, countless sick people in the city felt their ailments gradually warm up and then fade. Angel from the sky. Everyone in the ballroom was dumbfounded. An angel made of white light with white wings on its back flew out of Frederick's body and flew towards the window. The angel was only the size of a palm at first, and then it grew bigger and bigger. Someone reacted and immediately chased after it, and the others followed immediately. When they came outside, they saw that the angel had grown to a size of 100 meters in the air, and the light emanating from its body made it difficult to see its appearance. Frederick was confused, and secretly glanced at Psyche, and found that she had her mouth wide open like the maids next to her, and was so surprised that she couldn't speak. This is different from what was agreed. The original script was that this angel fell from the sky. How could it fly out of his body? This is a big trouble. The angel flew forward, and not far away, it stopped over the backyard of Duke Heger's house. Nils was overjoyed at this scene, laughing wildly for a long time and shouting, "Look! The God of Light has sent an angel to protect our family." Everyone in Cologne who could move rushed out of their homes, running and supporting each other, with only one destination, the place where the miracle had occurred. The Heger family mansion was surrounded by a river. An elderly woman was accidentally pushed into the water, but without a sound of falling, she actually stood up on the surface. Archbishop Victor was leading a group of priests towards the angels. Leaders from the group headquarters had suddenly arrived for an inspection, perhaps commissioned by the president, and the grassroots priests were running so hard that their shoes were about to fall off. However, everyone was stuck on the riverbank. At this moment, a priest saw the elderly woman standing on the surface, shouted to his colleagues, and then jumped in. Like the elderly woman, he stood firmly on the surface. Archbishop Victor saw this and waved his hand, and all the priests jumped into the water, treading on the surface to rush towards the leaders. Splash! A middle-aged priest took just 2 steps before falling into the water, startled and screaming for help. Archbishop Victor turned, shook his head, and said to the infamous bishop, "This is a test from the God of Light. Repent to him." Without looking back, he ran towards the angel's location. With this precedent, other priests with guilty consciences became uneasy, and soon several more fell into the water. They were all in the business together, and it was impossible to tell who was virtuous and who was cloaked in divine robes and committing unjust acts. Now, it was the latter who fell into the water, and the more evil they committed, the faster they fell. By the time Archbishop Victor and his companions arrived at the gate of the Heger family mansion, only a few remained. Chapter 196. Let God judge. A miracle occurred, and countless people knelt in prayer, some pondering in their hearts. Duke Heger stared solemnly at the angel above his house, momentarily confused as to what was happening. Nils continued to dance and shout, "Ha ha ha! We are the blessed family." Before he could finish his cry, the situation suddenly changed. Countless people saw the angel's head lowered, and in their hearts they felt it weeping in sorrow. Countless black ravens rose from the river behind Duke Heger's mansion and circled around the angel. Their incessant cries, like a mournful elegy, told of their own misfortune. In the Holy Scriptures, black ravens represent the souls of the deceased who refuse to enter heaven due to injustice, and only when their grievances are redeemed and their feathers turn white do they ascend to the resting place of their souls. A cold sweat instantly broke out on Nils' forehead. He knew all too well what lay in the river behind the back door. Duke Heger came over and whispered to his grandson, "Leave now, return home, and avoid this storm." Nils came to his senses and turned to leave. But as Nils lifted his foot, countless cries, curses, and wails exploded in his mind. The girls he had tortured to death appeared before him, their skeletal hands stretched out to him, demanding their lives. Startled by Nils's screams, the people around him turned their attention away from the angel and saw him rolling and crawling on the ground, as if surrounded by some terrifying presence. Duke Heger, like an ordinary, panicked old man, wanted to hold his grandson down, but was afraid of hurting him, let alone knocking him unconscious. He looked around for Psyche, but there was no one there. Instead, he saw Beecher, the burning mage and the leader of the Royal Mage Corps, approaching him with a group of magicians, their faces solemn. Elsewhere, Archbishop Victor and his companions knelt in prayer on the water's edge, their minds suddenly resonating with the leader's instructions. The people on the shore saw the priests fleeing faster than rabbits chased by hounds. Some went to close the sluice gates, while others went to the shore to ask if there were any magicians who could drain the water. The small river behind the Heger family mansion had been drained before dawn, and the onlookers on the shore were speechless at the sight of a pile of bones and recently decomposed corpses buried in the mud at the riverbed. These bones and corpses were still bound with ropes and even stones. On the riverbank, Rudolph's legs trembled. The matter before him was too huge, and he couldn't make a decision. He could only dispatch the Royal Mage Corps and the retired former leader to appease Duke Heger while sending men to the manor to inform his father. He looked around at the important officials around him, none dared to meet his gaze. Handling such a matter properly would inevitably offend Duke Heger, or even the God of Light. Neither side was something he could afford to offend, so they all chose to play it safe and avoid being the first to intervene. Frederick, who had arrived at some point, suddenly stood up and whispered to Rudolph, "I'll go talk to Duke Heger." Rudolph was startled, as if he had found a lifeline, and hurriedly said, "Please, Duke Wesson, please find a solution for this matter." The incident in Count Delden's ballroom had spread. Everyone knew that the angel had flown from Duke Wesson's body. Count Pisto had assured the Crown Prince and his colleagues of its authenticity, as his dark circles had completely disappeared. Since Duke Wesson had received the favor of the God of Light, he shouldn't be afraid of being killed by Duke Heger. Everyone consciously made way for Frederick, fearing he might change his mind later. Frederick returned to Madame Delden's house. Duke Heger was afraid to go home, panicked by the unprecedented situation. He had no choice but to stay here. In the guest room, Frederick found the haggard Duke Heger and Nils, who lay unconscious in bed. Beecher and another imposing old man sat quietly nearby. Frederick had never met this old man, but from the glance he gave him, he could sense that his strength was comparable to that of Duke Heger and Beecher, perhaps another powerful figure supported by the royal family. Duke Heger's reaction upon seeing Frederick was similar to Rudolph's. He stood up abruptly and asked hurriedly, "Do you have any solutions?" By this point, he already understood the outcome for his grandson. He believed Frederick was a messenger of the God of Light, and perhaps he could smooth things over with higher-ups and find him. But Frederick played dumb and replied, "What solutions? I still don't know what it is." Duke Heger asked in surprise, "You don't know about angels?" The Church of Light was full of stories about angels protecting the faithful, and he treated today's events as a replay of such stories. Frederick shook his head and said, "I don't know. Now that I think about it, when I received the Holy Codex, personally copied by the Pope and given to me by Archbishop Victor, I felt it suddenly warm. I guess the angel entered my body at that time. Can you tell me what happened?" "I know nothing about Nils." Duke Heger suddenly sat back in his chair, hunched over, his arms resting on his knees, his hands covering his face. "I ruined him. If I had been stricter with him since he was a child, even a little bit, he wouldn't be like this now." Frederick stood there quietly, listening to him ramble on about all the bad things Nils had done over the years. After listening, Frederick shook his head inwardly. Nils was born shortly before Duke Heger broke through to the level of Sword Saint. The sword saint considered this grandson a good omen for him and doted on him for so many years. Then something happened. Frederick understood. Duke Heger knew in his heart that Niels was doomed, but he didn't dare face the answer or bring it up. Let the god of light decide, Frederick whispered. He cared little for the sword saint's opinion, only for the corpses at the bottom of the river. Duke Heger clenched his hands tightly, as if a thought crossed his mind, but then he loosened them. He might have considered resolving the situation through force, but the two nearby deities dissuaded him. Duke Heger leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on his unconscious grandson. After a long pause, he gave a slight nod. I will bid farewell to His Majesty, he stood. I relinquish all my duties and donate all the property in Cologne to the church. At noon, in the center of the square in front of the palace, Niels lay like a dead fish. A circle of priests, led by Archbishop Victor, surrounded him. King William, Rudolph, and a group of ministers, who had rushed back, sat behind the windows on the highest floor of the palace. The square was filled with nobles and citizens. As the priests' prayers rose, white flames rose from the center of the square, enveloping the priests and Niels, a full 50 meters high. Niels' screams lasted 5 minutes. When the flames died down, he was reduced to ash, drifting in the wind. His clothes, the robe, and the sock stuffed in his mouth remained intact. Just then, the ravens surrounding the angel's cries changed from a dirge to a requiem, their colors gradually fading to white before rising high into the sky with the angel and vanishing without a trace. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 The Confessor. 3 days of continuous autumn rain brought a significant drop in temperature. The nobles of Corin donned new clothes, while ordinary citizens added sweaters. The poor could only wrap themselves in rags. In the autumn breeze, a robust old man, clad only in his underwear, a thorn wreath on his head, a long staff in his hand, and barefoot, slowly emerged from Corin's south gate, heading south. Everyone in the city knew Archbishop Victor and made way for him. This angelic arrival brought immense prestige to the Church of Light and strengthened the faith of the priests. However, Archbishop Victor felt a deep responsibility for the fact that so many priests had been forsaken by the God of Light within his diocese, right under his nose. Without hesitation, he cast off his soft, warm robes, donned a crown of thorns, and, armed only with a cane, embarked on a journey of penance to the holy city. He set out with no money, relying primarily on the charity of believers along the way, either doing odd jobs or accepting whatever gifts he could afford. It was autumn, with winter looming. The journey required crossing the White Mountains, a difficult and hostile terrain. Many consider this a journey of martyrdom. Victor walked slowly along the road, clutching a rosary in his left hand. It had been given to him by an officer stationed at the city gates upon his departure. The rosary was made of silver, with an intricate pattern, and he could remove a bead and exchange it for food when necessary. The sun gradually rose, the north wind intensified, and the temperature dropped. Blown, dead leaves danced in the wind, some falling onto the crown of thorns. Victor, oblivious to his surroundings, simply recited his prayers, twirled his rosary, and walked on, as if nothing concerned him. 3 days later, at dusk, he encountered a forester in the woods and was kindly invited to spend the night in his hut. Victor wanted to refuse, asking only for a pot of water and 2 slices of bread, but the ranger said, "I'm afraid you'll light a fire in the woods. The forest is dry and windy right now, and if you're not careful, the forest will catch fire. If you don't stay with me, I'll be watching you tonight." With that, Victor had no choice but to follow him to a small cabin by a pond in the forest. The cabin was simple, with only a fire pit, straw piled next to it for sleeping, a few pots and a few wooden boxes, and bows and arrows hanging on the wall. The ranger had no bread, only beans and grain flour, and he did have smoked rabbit caught with a tong. The grain porridge, a little salt, and a few pieces of smoked meat were their dinner. After finishing his meal, the ranger pulled something out of the box and said to Victor, "Yesterday, a gentleman came riding over on a winged unicorn and said it was for you." Victor was taken aback. Frederick had been busy with many things before leaving, and he had only spoken to him for a quick 10 minutes. He hadn't expected him to give him a cotton coat. The coat looked like the standard coat of the Wesson army, with a large cotton hood and, Most strikingly, 4 rows of lead buttons. In the outer pockets were 2 pairs of gloves and 2 pairs of large socks. The hem was buttoned up to form a sleeping bag. A backpack was sewn onto the back, containing a large piece of folded waterproof cloth. Inside the coat were pockets filled with a lighter, a magic lamp, a large thermos that held a kilogram of water, a sewing kit, a dagger, a water filter, a multipurpose knife, a bag of salt, several packets of candy, a palm-sized volume of selected quotations from the Holy Scriptures, several bottles of medicine for diarrhea and colds, 2 revolvers, a bag of bullets, and other miscellaneous items. There was also a note that read, "The buttons are all gold." A smile crossed Victor's face as he accepted the coat Frederick had given him, wondering what the little guy was up to. Meanwhile, the front door of Frederick's house was lined with butlers delivering invitations. Their master had told them not to return unless they could get the new chancellor home. Duke Heger had returned home, and the chancellor had resigned. William, with a quick glance, decided to give Frederick the position. Anyway, this position had been partially vacant. It was originally used to make money for Duke Heger. Switching it to making money for Frederick would make no difference to the king, and it would even serve to flatter him. Frederick was too lazy to jump into this quagmire. After finalizing the contract for the procurement of arms with the Minister of War, Count Pisto, he handed a letter of appointment to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, appointing Rudolph as the full-power assistant to the Minister of Finance. When the Minister of Finance is not in Cologne, all matters will be handled by the full-power assistant. Let the people in the quagmire handle the wrestling in the quagmire. After finishing these things, Frederick took Psyche and slipped away on a boat. After they ran away, his butler in Cologne came forward to say that the master had run away. That night, Psyche finally opened her eyes. Frederick, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, finally breathed a sigh of relief. "You finally woke up. You scared me to death." Psyche looked at the cabin and asked, "How long have I been lying there?" "Almost 7 days, Frederick said with some fear. "If I had known it would be like this, I wouldn't have let you be this angel." After that, he opened the lid of a bottle of happy water and handed it over. Psyche sat up against the headboard of the bed and drank half a bottle of happy water in one gulp. Then she shook her head and said, "It's okay. I just went to the subspace full of light elements to take a look. I found a relic, so I studied it for a few more days." Frederick breathed a sigh of relief. Before he could ask again, Psyche looked at him with a very strange look and asked a little nervously, "You haven't done anything strange to my body in the past few days, right?" "A lot." Frederick rolled his eyes at her unhappily. "I've done everything I can." Psyche reached out and pinched his face, then said with a smile, "You can learn summoning from Artisha. When the time comes, raise a few light elemental creatures in the light elemental subspace, dress them up as angels, and release them to scare people." Frederick hurriedly shook his head and refused. "Forget it. It will be troublesome if the Holy See asks me to go to war with the pagans. It's okay to do this kind of thing once. If you do it too many times, it will be exposed." Artisha is already a little suspicious. Artisha could summon fire elementals to fight for her, and since she didn't believe in the god of light, she initially suspected the angel was a scam. It was only because Psyche had added some healing properties, not found in ordinary elementals, that she was slightly suspicious. Just then, Artisha arrived with a basin of hot water. Upon hearing the last part, she asked in surprise, "You really did that? Do you want me to step aside for a moment?" "Keep watch." Frederick and Psyche were furious, nearly using her figurehead as a figurehead. Fortunately, Psyche was proficient in soul magic, able to erase a person's recent memories, otherwise, there would be serious trouble. Drowsily, Artisha placed the basin of hot water beside the bed and, along with Psyche, looked at Frederick. Frederick blinked and was thrown out of the cabin. Artisha had come to clean Psyche, something she had done every day since Frederick assigned her to care for her, unbeknownst to him. Frederick hadn't brought tarot with him this time, fearing he'd be held back by the chaos. Artisha was just the right person for him, with her considerable fighting prowess and the chance to teach him summoning. As for Psyche, the only condition for her to create an angel was that Frederick had to develop roast duck. Chapter 198 Pen Pal. Frederick's ship failed to catch up with the main force in the lowlands, but instead turned and arrived at the site where old Count Wesson had died. The site of this logistics camp was carefully chosen, a small basin surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, with a large river flowing in front of it. 4 years had passed since the war, and now it was a grazing land, with a flock of sheep grazing on the last bit of hay. The shepherd took one look at the visitors' carriage and clothing, determined they were not here to steal sheep, and ignored them. Not far from the river stood a 3-meter-high stone tablet. Inscribed on the front in Gaulish script was the words, "Passerby, please tell the world that a warrior here sacrificed his life as an example of loyalty." On the back, also in Gaulish, was a story about old Count Wessen's deeds. Frederick stood quietly before the tablet, silent for a long time. He had only brought Tony with him today. Tony had received financial support from the old Count of Wesson when his father was seriously ill. After his father recovered, Tony traveled to Wessenberg to repay his debt. He later joined the cavalry guards and now served as Frederick's bodyguard. As Frederick was about to leave, Tony whispered, "Master, someone's coming." A carriage stopped on the riverside road, and a young woman in a red silk dress alighted and slowly approached. She was between 14 and 15 years old, quite tall, and her appearance struck Frederick as familiar. She approached Frederick and said cheerfully in Gallic, "You've certainly come here." Frederick paused, then, surprised, asked in Gallic, "Are you Françoise?" Françoise's beautiful face lit up with a brilliant smile and nodded excitedly. Frederick hadn't expected to see his pen pal from the Kingdom of Gaul here. He had written her a letter before leaving for the campaign, promising to write back once he'd settled down. He asked cheerfully, "What brings you here? How's your brother Armand doing?" Françoise smiled and said, "Thanks to your help, I'm now quite wealthy, so I bought some land here. I figured you'd come, so I came to see you and take a look at the land I bought." Frederick kept a smile on his face, but sighed inwardly at the message her words contained. The war 4 years ago was essentially a battle between the Confederation of the Rhine and the Kingdom of Gaul for control of the Low Countries. The Kingdom of Gaul won, so now their nobles can come here to buy land. If the Confederation had won 4 years ago, it would have been Frederick's family who came to buy the land. No war is without cause, the root of all wars is economic conflict. Françoise blushed slightly and asked Frederick, "May I have the honor of inviting you to my estate?" Frederick nodded in agreement and asked Tony to tell Psyche and the others that he would be staying for a few days, allowing them to explore Amstel on their own. Françoise immediately laughed and took Frederick's hand, leading them toward the carriage. The lowlands to the east still had some mountains, surrounded by some cultivated land. The other 3 sides were mostly low flatlands and marshes, with little arable land. Françoise was the general agent for Wesson paper products in the Kingdom of Gaul. Frederick had originally intended to use her family to establish sales channels, but she had unexpectedly managed to accomplish this on her own. Her method was simple. She recruited a number of prominent nobles as regional agents and simply sold her products to them, without interfering with their sales practices. Françoise was now wealthy, but the money came too late to buy a good property. She could only buy land on slightly higher ground, near the sea, more than 20 kilometers west of Amstel, surrounded by marshes. The owner's house was on the highest point, and from the 3rd-floor terrace, one could see the entire estate and even the sea to the west. Chestnut trees formed the border around the estate, and now that the chestnuts were ripe, one could see many people harvesting them. Françoise said to Frederick with a hint of pride, "I'll personally prepare a delicious meal for you tomorrow." Frederick was flattered and immediately said seriously, "Then I won't eat anything from now on. I'll look forward to tomorrow's delicious meal." Françoise laughed at his words, then said, "That's a shame. I made dinner tonight myself." "Oh," Frederick said immediately. "Then I'm looking forward to dinner tonight." That afternoon, Françoise invited Frederick to make himself at home while she went to the kitchen to get busy. Curious, Frederick followed her and discovered 2 kitchens, one dedicated to Françoise and the other where the servants were busy. In the private kitchen, he saw a large purple lobster lying in a basin. Françoise had just changed into cook's outfit, donned an apron, and tied a headscarf around her golden hair. She had opened a barrel and poured strong liquor into the basin, intoxicating the lobster to death. Then, she skillfully used professional-looking tools to shell the lobsters and remove the meat, then marinated them in white wine, salt, and pepper. During this time, she preheated the oven, chopped the onions, and heated the oil in the pan. She put the marinated lobsters in the pan and fried them for a while. Her operation was skillful and careful, and she didn't let the oil splash. After the lobster meat was fried, she took it out and heated butter in another pan. She put the diced onions in and sautéed them until fragrant, and then put the lobster meat in and stir-fried them evenly. Françoise finally took out the lobster meat and onions and put them in a baking dish, sprinkled them with shredded cheese, and put them in the oven to bake until the surface was slightly charred. Frederick watched quietly from the side, and saw that she was very focused from beginning to end. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, and she looked very happy. Her sapphire-like eyes seemed to be shining. Françoise noticed that the way Frederick looked at her was a little different from when they were just chatting. "What's wrong?" Frederick said subconsciously. "You're beautiful when you're focused." Françoise blushed slightly and pushed him out of the kitchen, telling him to wait in the dining room. Frederick followed the servants to the dining room, and soon after, dinner arrived. Françoise had changed into a simple blue housecoat when she arrived. As dinner began, she watched with some nervousness as Frederick cut a piece of lobster meat with melted cheese and slowly put it into his mouth. As soon as Frederick finished his bite, she immediately asked, "How does it taste?" Frederick smiled and nodded, replying, "It's the most delicious thing I've ever tasted." Françoise immediately smiled, a smile so bright that it was obvious that she was genuinely happy. Chapter 199 How about buying some swampland? A pungent smell of fireworks filled his nostrils, startling Frederick out of bed. He looked around to see where the fire was. There was no fire in the bedroom, no cries for help outside. Outside, the window was filled with smoke, thinned by the wind. He walked to the window and opened it, only to see a huge fire burning in the marshland in the distance, its smoke obscuring the sky. The farmers on the estate, however, paid no attention, leisurely going about their work. After washing up, Frederick was led by a servant to the dining room for breakfast. Françoise was already there, slicing the baguette-shaped bread that foreigners call the indestructible spear of Gaul. Seeing him, Françoise said, "Come and have breakfast. I wonder if you'll be able to get used to it." Dietary habits differed between the two places. Frederick's breakfast traditionally consisted of various sausages and milk, while Françoise's breakfast consisted of bread, jam, and tea. Milk was also present, but it was added to the tea, making it milk tea. Françoise spread amber applesauce on a slice of bread and placed it on a plate in front of Frederick. "This is my homemade applesauce. Try it. Ever since you discovered microorganisms and invented necromancy to preserve food, more people are learning this kind of magic." Frederick took a bite of the bread. The freshly baked bread was still warm and soft, and the jam was very sweet. "It's delicious," he nodded repeatedly. Françoise immediately said, "I'll make it and send it to you later." "Okay," Frederick replied. Breakfast time was often the time to arrange work on the estate. Soon, the butler and the village chief arrived to explain the fire outside. The swamp outside the estate was infested with mosquitoes and venomous snakes, and all kinds of dangerous animals lurked in the mud. People and livestock were afraid to approach, and wild animals would be in great danger of death if they did. This caused great trouble for traveling caravans. In autumn, the reds and other plants in the swamp began to wither, so the locals burned them to reduce the number of poisonous insects, otherwise the caravans would not dare approach next year. Weeds can't be completely burned, they'll grow again with the spring breeze. Next year, reeds and other plants will sprout in the fields, and insects will reappear. But without the protection of tall plants, returning migratory birds will easily eat them. Generally, a marshland is burned every 2 or 3 years, and this year it was the land surrounding the estate. Françoise said to Frederick dejectedly, "I wanted to play chess with you today, but I can't stay here any longer." Seeing the new owner's displeasure, the village chief quickly said, "If you want to go out and have fun, you can go to the beach now. You'll find plenty of crabs, as well as beautiful shells and conchs. The wind blows from the sea, so you won't be suffocated by the smoke." "Really?" Françoise asked immediately. "You can pick up conchs," the village chief immediately assured her. Françoise turned to Frederick. "How about we go to the beach later? Maybe we can even find lobsters." Frederick's expression matched the village chief's. He wanted to laugh, but he couldn't hold it back. "Why are you saying that?" Françoise noticed something strange in Frederick's expression. Frederick explained, "Lobsters live on the seabed, they don't come ashore." "How can that be?" Françoise pouted. "Don't lobsters have big claws like crabs? Why do crabs come ashore but lobsters don't?" Frederick burst out laughing. Seeing Françoise's pout deepen, he quickly said, "Because lobsters' legs are too thin compared to their bodies. They don't have the strength to walk on land, so they can only crawl on the seabed." Françoise thought about the lobster she had eaten last night and felt that made sense. Then Frederick remembered something and asked the village chief, "Whose land is that out there in the swamp?" The chief replied, "Who would want that kind of rotten land? I heard that even with 10 hectares for 1 gold coin, No one would buy it. Frederick was disheartened. He had thought someone would buy the swampland to pump water, so he could sell high-powered steam engines and water pumps. But no one was willing to do such a long-term business. Even if Frederick wanted to buy land, he couldn't. The current sale of land in the lowlands was a trophy reaped by the Gallic nobility, a privileged possession. Other nations, let alone those on the losing side, could only watching. Marshland reclamation was technically a simple task for Frederick. Some marshes in the Wessenland region were already undergoing renovation. The first and most important step was to conserve and lower the water level in the marshes, including digging diversion channels, building dams, digging drainage ditches, and installing drainage equipment. Drainage was a fixed requirement. Wheat yielded best when the groundwater level was 1.5 meters, while barley yielded best at 0.6 meters. Simply drain any shallow water in the marshes and lower the water level to a sufficient depth below the surface. The second step was to till the land to increase air in the soil, remove methane and hydrogen sulfide produced by anaerobic bacteria, and encourage the growth of aerobic bacteria that decompose organic matter. If necessary, some foreign soil could be applied to introduce aerobic bacteria, along with phosphorus and potassium fertilizers. If the soil is too sticky, sand can be spread to improve it. The third step is to sow plants with rhizobia to further improve the soil, and then it can be cultivated. When Frederick came to his senses, he found that Françoise had finished breakfast and was resting her chin on the table with one hand, looking at him with a smile. "You're so charming when you're thinking," Françoise said with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing," Frederick replied. "I'm thinking about turning those swamps into farmland. Now that you've eaten, let's go to the beach." The sea was unpolluted at this time, and the beach was clean and beautiful. In the past, villagers would come to the beach to play, but today, because the leaders were coming, they had all been sent away. Frederick was sure that Françoise rarely went to the beach before. The old village chief had sent his granddaughter, a girl named Lulu, who was about Frederick's age, to dig in the sand for prey. Françoise was having a great time, showing off every find to Frederick. Frederick quietly made a fortune, recalling the videos of sea hunting he had seen before, and soon the wooden barrel was full. Françoise's servants set up a sunshade on the beach and hung up a curtain to block the wind. They also brought kitchen utensils and cooked the seafood here. After a seafood feast, Françoise was a little tired and took a nap in the shed. Frederick came to the beach and picked up beautiful shells and conchs along the way. Lulu followed her grandfather's teachings and followed wherever the leader went. She followed behind Frederick to help pick up shells. Frederick chatted with her casually and learned that she usually lived in Amstel with her parents, but recently there were many troops from the Duchy of the Rhine passing through Amstel to go to the Elbe River, and the security was not very good, so she came to stay with her grandfather for a few days. "What kind of business do you want to make in the future?" Frederick began to investigate the industry. "Let's go to sea," Lulu said excitedly. "I'm going to build the world's largest fleet and trade in every port." Frederick couldn't help but smile when he saw her eyes light up with excitement. But Lou immediately said dejectedly, "There's a lot to learn about going to sea and doing business. I need to find partners, get licenses, and buy a boat. All of this costs money, and I don't have that much." Frederick smiled and saw a half-red scallop on the beach in front of him. He picked it up, drew his dagger, and pierced the base. He wore a gold necklace with a double-headed eagle pendant, which he would sell for money when needed. He put the scallop on it. "This is for you." Lulu's hands were both holding a wooden bucket filled with shells and conchs, so Frederick helped her put the shell necklace around her neck. Frederick said, "When you feel you're capable of going out to sea, bring the necklace to me in Wissenberg. I'll provide an investment as your startup capital." Lulu was startled, her face flushing, even to the base of her neck. She lowered her head and softly replied. Frederick felt that his actions had been frivolous and a little embarrassed. He didn't want to say anything more, as it would only make things worse. So he and Lulu continued to collect shells in silence. The beach was full of brightly colored sea snails, finger-sized, with smooth, high ridges on their backs and a narrow opening on their abdomens. Frederick picked up a lot of them, intending to string them into bracelets to give away. Chapter 200 Bought a lot of land. After returning from the beach, Françoise changed into her cook's clothes, tied her hair, and began preparing dinner in her own private kitchen. Frederick stood at the table, carefully examining the chicken on the plate. This golden-skinned chicken was a specialty of the Kingdom of Gaul, its skin the color of gold. Like a country bumpkin, Frederick poked at it from time to time to confirm that it was a real chicken and not a gold model. Françoise took the golden-skinned chicken away, washed it, and rubbed salt and pepper inside the belly. She then rubbed olive oil and salt on the outside. Then she heated a frying pan to melt the butter, added chopped garlic and chopped onion, and sautéed them until they changed color. She then added the soaked mushrooms, celery, and chopped carrots and set aside to cool. Then she diced some leftover bread from the previous morning and soaked it in milk, chopped the rosemary, and peeled and diced the chestnuts from yesterday's harvest. After squeezing the milk out of the softened bread, Françoise combined all the ingredients she had prepared, adding salt and pepper, and stirred to create the filling. Finally, she stuffed the filling into the golden-skinned chicken, sealing it tightly. Using a pin, she pierced the opening in the skin and sealed it, then tied the chicken with cotton string to secure the shape. Once the oven was heated, she placed chopped onions, celery, garlic, and carrots in a baking pan, along with some water. She then greased the chicken with olive oil, placed it in a baking dish, and then placed it in the oven. Every 15 minutes, Françoise opened the oven lid and took the chicken out, basting it with the juices from the basin to flavor it. After 2 hours, she basted it for the final time, surrounding the chicken with a generous amount of peeled chestnuts. At dinner, Françoise carved up the golden glowing chicken and placed it, along with the filling and chestnuts, on a plate in front of Frederick. Frederick examined the radiant chicken with such care that he practically reached for a microscope. He'd heard of dishes in the kingdom of Gaul that glowed golden, but this was the first time he'd seen one. Under Françoise's urging and watchful eye, Frederick cut a piece of chicken, took a bite, and then asked, "Can you sell us this golden chicken, alive?" Françoise smiled and shook her head, saying, "Unfortunately, no, we can't sell this kind of golden chicken alive, but I heard the golden chicken comes from the southern continent, but they're not this big, they're thin, and the people there have skin as black as charcoal. If you want one, you can find it there." Frederick nodded slightly, determined to get this delicious golden chicken back from Uncle Black. As for the breed, the small size didn't matter. Weissenberg University had experts who could raise lynxes into pigs, so breeding a meteor golden chicken shouldn't be a problem. The two chatted over their meal for a while when Françoise suddenly asked Frederick, "You looked like you were thinking of buying the swampland this morning." Frederick replied, still eating, "Yes, I have that thought, but there's nothing I can do." "The land won't be sold to the Rhine Confederation," Françoise said. "Actually, there's a solution. We have a limit on land purchases here. Since I'm buying as an individual, not as a family, I only have enough to buy this estate." Frederick nodded, he'd heard of it. The estate Françoise bought covered over 100 hectares, with a side length of just over a kilometer, not huge compared to the larger estates of 500 or 600 hectares. She continued, "So someone came up with a plan. Locals can buy land without restrictions. They pay them to buy the land, then lease it for 999 years at a very low price." Frederick nodded slightly. This loophole would never disappear. But he said awkwardly, "I'm afraid this method is reserved for you." "I can't get away with it." Françoise smiled brightly, then said seriously, "If you trust me, I can help you." Frederick thought for a moment and said, "I'll think about it." He was just pretending to consider it. The purpose of this investment wasn't to buy the land, but to promote the steam engine. Even if Françoise swallowed the land, the money could be recouped from the steam engine sales. He agreed as dinner was about to end. After dinner, Françoise took Frederick to the study, where there was a promotional map she had received when she bought the land. It marked the general topography of the entire Low Countries. Frederick studied the map. It was a large, white paper imported from the canton of Wesson, engraved and printed by the Kingdom of Gaul. His eyes narrowed slightly. It seemed that a patent law set was going to be necessary. This world's patent law was developed by magicians. Magical patents were initially registered, and then expanded to encompass all walks of life and national patents. A breakdown of this system would mean that magicians' painstakingly developed magic could be freely used by others. Therefore, they deeply detested the theft of patents and were not afraid of legal action. Over the next few days, Frederick devoted his mornings to map study, took time off to bring back the dawn from Amstel, and took Françoise for an aerial survey of the marshland in the afternoons, occasionally stopping to question nearby villagers. Meanwhile, word had spread throughout Amstel that the Duke of Wesson had purchased a vast tract of marshland through his Gallic lover. The rumors were so convincing that many believed the Duke had been kicked in the head by his winged unicorn. The Gallic nobles behind the lowlands were bewildered, but after some discussion, They concluded that purchasing only the marshland was fine. Later, feeling somewhat guilty, as he was the Count of Wessen's son and had many followers, word would spread that they were bullying a child, so they decided to sell off a small portion of the surrounding land. When the amount of marshland the Duke of Wesson intended to purchase, 3,000 hectares, was confirmed, everyone thought he'd been kicked in the head twice. The local government immediately expressed their hope that he'd buy more, ideally with a 20-year tax-free period. Everyone thought the officials were being unbelievably rude. The marshland produced little except for reeds cut and sold on the outskirts. It had always been unowned, untaxed. The local government officials eventually realized this was a problem and significantly reduced the tax rate. However, what happened next convinced everyone that the Duke of Wesson had been kicked in the head more than 10 times. He actually increased his marshland purchases, acquiring vast tracts of marshland to the south, ultimately becoming a shadowy landowner of tens of thousands of hectares. The contract was signed in just half a day. The landowner was a young woman from Amstel named Lulu. Such white-glove tactics were commonplace, and Frederick and Françoise simply found a nearby contractor. The land was then leased to Françoise for 99 years, with automatic renewal upon expiration, and then subleased to the Duke of Wesson for 98 years, also with automatic renewal upon expiration. The Duke of Wesson's decisiveness was evident, and the entire lowland region stonemasons guild and engineers were invited to Amstel to take on the project. He demanded that drainage ditches be dug around each marshland plot and low dams be built to enclose it. The soil from the drainage ditches would be used directly to build the adjacent dams. The drainage ditches, 2 to 4 meters wide and 1 to 2 meters deep, would all connect to the nearby rivers. The width and depth of the ditches diverting the existing rivers could be increased as appropriate. While these projects appear simple, they require a significant amount of earthwork and will not be completed until next summer. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.